He shoved the telegram into her hand so hard the paper tore at the corner. "There's been a mistake," Wallace Pruitt said, loud enough for everyone on the platform to hear. "A very expensive mistake, and I intend to see it corrected before that train pulls another mile down the track." He didn't look at Clara when he said it. He looked at the station master. Because to Wallace Pruitt, Clara Ashcroft wasn't a person standing in front of him. She was a parcel delivered to the wrong address. She was 57 years old, gray-haired, and she'd traveled 4 days on a rattling train to marry a man she'd never met. And now the man who'd sent for her was standing on a Dakota platform treating her like unclaimed freight. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been told, without a single word, that you don't count, stay with me. Because what happens next on this frozen platform in Red Hollow is going to surprise you. Before we go further, if stories about real people and real courage move you, please subscribe to this channel and hit that like button. And drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to that platform. The telegram had said widow, capable, experienced, age unspecified. That was the phrase that had done it, age unspecified. Clara hadn't lied exactly. She'd answered the matrimonial advertisement in the Omaha paper honestly enough. She'd listed her skills, her health, her willingness to work hard land in a hard climate. She'd mentioned her late husband, 22 years of marriage to a struggling farmer in eastern Nebraska, the 3 children grown and gone and settled elsewhere. She'd mentioned her experience with livestock and crop rotation and preserving food through lean winters. She had not mentioned she was 57. The agency had not asked. And somewhere between Omaha and the Dakota Territory, in the tangled correspondence between lonely ranchers and matrimonial brokers who cared more about their commission than the lives they shuffled like cards, a different woman's name had been attached to Clara's file. A younger woman. A woman named Evelyn Cross, 26 years old, recently arrived from Philadelphia, who had apparently accepted 3 different frontier proposals simultaneously and vanished before honoring any of them. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the platform and the cold, and Wallace Pruitt's voice carrying across the thin November air like he was auctioning cattle. The contract specified a woman of marriageable age and sound constitution, Pruitt was saying to the station master. A soft-bellied man named Aldous Finch, who kept glancing between Pruitt and Clara like he couldn't decide which of them frightened him more. "What they sent me is neither." Clara stood with her carpetbag at her feet. She did not move. She had learned over 57 years of living among men who thought loudness equaled authority that stillness was its own kind of power. You let them finish. Then you spoke. "I'm standing right here, Mr. Pruitt," she said. He looked at her then, really looked at her. The gray at her temples, the lines at the corners of her eyes, the straight back and the hands that had worked too hard for too long to be mistaken for anything other than what they were. "I can see that," he said. "Then perhaps you'd like to address your concerns to me directly, rather than to Mr. Finch, who had nothing to do with the arrangement." Finch looked enormously relieved to be removed from the conversation. Pruitt stepped closer. He was a big man, not fat, but wide across the shoulders, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and knew it, and had never quite forgiven the years for taking that away. He was maybe 60, Clara guessed, which made his performance about her age all the more peculiar. "The agency sent me someone else's papers," he said, dropping his voice to something that was probably meant to sound reasonable. "That isn't your fault, and it isn't mine, but I cannot in good conscience—" "In good conscience," Clara repeated. She said it quietly, the way you repeat a phrase when you want to make sure you've heard it correctly. "Is that the phrase you'd like to use? I have a ranch to run. I have specific needs. So do I," she said. "And one of them is not being discussed like I've gone deaf." She picked up her carpetbag. "Now, is there someone at this station who can tell me when the next eastbound train departs? I'd like to make arrangements." There wasn't one for 11 days. That was what Finch told her, apologetically, his hat turning in his hands. The line had been intermittent since September, and with the weather turning, the schedule had become something between a suggestion and a joke. The next confirmed eastbound wasn't expected until the 14th. It was the 3rd of November. Pruitt left without another word. He had a horse and a buggy waiting, and he climbed into it and drove away while Clara stood on the platform doing arithmetic in her head. 11 days. She had $17.40 in her purse, which she'd calculated as enough for the return ticket plus modest meals during the journey, leaving nothing for 11 days in an unfamiliar town with no lodging arranged, and winter pressing down from the north like a hand. She looked at the sky. The clouds had that flat, yellowish quality she recognized from Nebraska winters, the kind of sky that wasn't threatening snow yet, but was thinking about it seriously. "Is there a boarding house in town?" she asked Finch. "There's the Grantham place. Mrs. Grantham takes in travelers sometimes." He hesitated. "She's particular." "Most people are." Clara picked up her bag. "Which direction?" She had gone perhaps 20 steps when she heard the second horse. He came in from the north road, which meant he'd ridden from the direction opposite town, which meant he'd come from the open range, which told her before she even saw his face that he was a rancher rather than a townsman. The horse was a working animal, heavy-boned and patient, with mud dried up to its knees. The man riding it looked about the same, not young, not old, somewhere in the difficult middle territory where a man's face told you more about his choices than his years. He pulled up at the platform and looked at Finch first, then at Clara, then at the empty road where Pruitt's buggy had gone. "Was that Pruitt just now?" "Yes, sir," Finch said. "What did he want?" There was a situation with the matrimonial arrangement, some confusion with— "I can explain it myself," Clara said. The man on the horse looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated attention of someone who had spent most of his life reading weather in animals rather than people, and had therefore never learned the social habit of pretending not to look. "All right," he said. "The agency made an error with their paperwork," Clara said. "A woman named Evelyn Cross accepted Mr. Pruitt's proposal. I accepted someone else's, a Mr. Garrett Hale, who ranches north of here, according to the correspondence. The files were mixed. I arrived with Mr. Pruitt's contract attached to my file, and Miss Cross apparently went somewhere else entirely. Mr. Pruitt has declined to honor the arrangement and has left." She paused. "I'm waiting for the eastbound train." The man was quiet for a moment. "I'm Garrett Hale," he said. Clara looked at him. He looked at her. "I see," she said. "The agency sent me correspondence about a woman named Clara Ashcroft," he said. "Widow, experienced, Nebraska farmer. That's me." The description was— He stopped. "Incomplete," she offered. "I was going to say general." "The agency rarely asks for details they consider irrelevant," Clara said. "My age apparently fell into that category." She shifted the carpet bag to her other hand. "I won't waste your time, Mr. Hale. You came expecting someone suitable for the arrangement you had in mind, and I'm clearly not that person. I've already asked about the boarding house." Garrett Hale sat on his horse in the cold and said nothing for a moment. His expression wasn't unkind. It wasn't much of anything, actually, which Clara had learned was its own kind of language, the language of a man who thought before he spoke, which was rarer than it ought to be. "I was expecting someone else," he said finally. Clara looked down at her carpet bag, then back up at him. "Then let me stay until you find her," she said. "I'll earn my place every single day, Volta." She hadn't planned to say it that way. The words had come out shaped by something she couldn't quite name. Not desperation, not exactly, though $17.40 and 11 days in a strange town came close. More like the bone-deep practicality of a woman who had spent 57 years solving problems with whatever materials were at hand. Garrett Hale studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at the sky. "Storm's coming," he said. "I know," Clara said. "I've been watching it since Bismarck." Something shifted in his face. Not much. Barely enough to call a change. But she'd been reading faces since before this man was born, and she caught it. "The boarding house isn't going to be comfortable," he said. "Mrs. Grantham is particular. Mr. Finch mentioned. Particular and expensive. And the weather's going to turn hard before the week's out." He looked at Finch, who had developed a sudden intense interest in the station's window frame. "I've got space in the house. My Aunt Eleanor has the east room, and there's a spare off the kitchen that's been empty since the last hand left." "I won't take charity," Clara said. "I didn't offer any. I said I had space." He looked back at her. If you're going to stay somewhere for 11 days, you might as well stay somewhere useful. I've got fences that need work and an inventory that's been wrong since September. You're offering me work, she said. I'm saying the work is there if you want it, he said. What you want to call it is your business. Clara considered this. She considered the sky again, and the $17, and the particular Mrs. Grantham, and the 11 days. I'll need to know the condition of the fences, she said. Bad, he said. And the inventory discrepancy? Worse than the fences. All right, she said. I'll need my bag loaded carefully. There are preserved goods in the bottom that don't respond well to jostling. He dismounted, which she hadn't expected, and took the carpet bag from her without ceremony. Eleanor's going to have questions, he said, tying the bag behind the saddle. So will I, Clara said. That's generally how conversations work. He looked at her over the horse's back, and she thought she saw something briefly in his eyes, not amusement quite, but something adjacent to it, something that hadn't been there a moment ago. Can you ride? He asked. I haven't for some years, she said. I'll manage. He helped her up without fuss and mounted behind her, and they rode north away from the station while Finch watched them go with the expression of a man who had witnessed something he wasn't sure he understood, but would definitely be telling people about later. The ride north took the better part of an hour, and the cold had real teeth in it by the time the ranch came into sight, a collection of low buildings arranged in the practical defensive way of frontier structures, huddled together against the wind rather than spread out the way buildings get when the people inside them feel safe. Clara had seen ranches like this before. The bones were good. The upkeep was struggling. She noticed the fence line first, not because she was looking for it. She'd already known it was bad from the way Garrett had said the word, but because it was the kind of thing that announced itself to a person who knew what to look for. Posts leaning, wire running loose between them, a whole section along the north pasture that had given up the argument entirely and lay flat in the dead grass. She didn't say anything. She filed it. She noticed the barn doors, which hung slightly off kilter, meaning the hinges were either loose or the frame had settled. She noticed the water trough, which had a crack running along the near side. Not fatal yet, but a problem in hard freeze. She noticed the pile of lumber near the equipment shed that had been sitting long enough to start warping. She noticed, most of all, the way the ranch hand standing near the corral watched them ride in. He was young, maybe 25, with the particular quality of looseness in his posture that came from either deep confidence or deep boredom, and she could tell from 10 yards away that it was the latter. He glanced at Garrett, then at Clara, and something moved across his face that wasn't quite a smirk, but was the cousin of one. "This the bride?" he called out. Garrett's jaw moved before he answered. "This is Mrs. Ashcroft. She'll be staying through the next train." "Right," the young man said, drawing the word out. "Sure thing, boss." Garrett didn't respond to that, which told Clara something about the dynamic before she'd set foot inside the house. She got herself down from the horse without help, which she suspected had been a minor question he hadn't voiced, and took her bag from him. "I'll find my own way to the kitchen room," she said. "Is there someone to introduce me to your aunt, or should I introduce myself?" "Eleanor will find you," Garrett said. "She finds everyone." Oh. Eleanor Hale was 75 years old and had lived on the frontier since she was 19, and she moved through the house with the careful confidence of someone who had long since stopped making peace with her limitations and started working around them. Her right hand shook. Her left didn't. She'd adapted. Clara could see it in the way she held her coffee cup, the way she reached for things. She was sitting in the kitchen when Clara let herself in through the back door, and she looked up from her mending with eyes that were absolutely clear and absolutely direct and missed nothing. "You're not what I expected," Eleanor said. "So I've been told this morning," Clara said. "I'm Clara Ashcroft." "I know who you are. I mean, you're not what Garrett expected, and I'm trying to decide if that's going to be a problem." Clara set her bag near the door and looked at the woman steadily. "It's going to be up to him, isn't it?" "Well, yes," Eleanor said. "That's what I'm trying to work out." She set down her mending. "You want coffee?" "Very much," Clara said. "Sit down, then." Clara sat. Eleanor poured, and the two women sized each other up over the steam with the frank, no-nonsense attention of people who had both stopped having time to waste on social performance decades ago. "How old are you?" Eleanor asked. 57? Garrett's 42. I know, Clara said. He doesn't have to feel any particular way about that. He doesn't know how he feels about anything yet, Eleanor said, with the resigned affection of a woman who had watched her nephew go through life making careful, practical decisions and calling it wisdom. He thinks he does. He's wrong. She picked up her mending again. You've run a farm? For 22 years. Livestock? Cattle, pigs, some sheep, horses. Any of them die on you when they didn't need to? The question was blunt enough to startle a smaller person. Clara recognized it for what it was. A test, not an insult. One horse, she said. My first winter, before I knew the signs. I've never missed them since. Eleanor looked at her over the mending. What signs? A horse that's heading into trouble stops eating before it does anything else. You watch the feed, not the animal, the feed first, then the animal. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then, Garrett had 3 horses go down last winter. He thought it was the cold. Was it? One of them, maybe. She paused. The others, I'm not so sure. Clara wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. I'd like to look at the remaining stock tomorrow morning, if that's all right. Eleanor put the mending down entirely this time. She looked at Clara with an expression that wasn't quite a smile, but had something underneath it that was warmer than scrutiny. You can look at the stock tonight if you want, she said. Lanterns on the peg by the door. Well, the young hand's name was Danny Polk, and he had 2 friends who worked the ranch part-time, brothers named Cal and Pete Wexler, who came in most mornings and left before supper. Clara didn't introduce herself to them. She watched them first. She watched the way they moved around the barn, fast when Garrett was visible, loose and careless when he wasn't. She watched the way they handled the animals, not cruel but thoughtless, the way young men handle things they've never had to worry about losing. She watched the way Danny Polk tracked her with his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking, the way his mouth curled at the corners when she asked Garrett a practical question and Garrett answered it seriously. She'd been dismissed by better men than Danny Polk, and by worse ones, and she'd learned a long time ago that being dismissed was sometimes the most useful position a person could occupy. You saw more from the margins. People talked more freely around someone they'd already decided didn't matter. She heard Danny talking to Cal Wexler that first evening, voices carrying from the equipment shed while she stood on the other side of the barn wall checking the horses' feed levels. What do you figure he's going to do with her? She's older than my ma. Cal Wexler laughed. Got me. Charity case, maybe. She doesn't look like a charity case, Danny said, and there was something in his voice that was more puzzled than mean, which Clara filed alongside everything else. She moved on to the next stall and checked the water levels and said nothing. Garrett found her in the barn an hour after supper, which she'd cooked because Eleanor's hands had been shaking worse than usual, and because the pantry she'd inventoried in her head during the afternoon had told her that someone needed to start rationing what was there before the math became catastrophic. She had made a bean and salt pork stew that used exactly the right amounts of everything and tasted, by the expression on Danny Polk's face when he thought no one was watching, better than he'd expected. She was examining the 3rd horse's hooves when Garrett came in with a lantern. She doesn't need her hooves checked, he said. No, Clara agreed. But the one in the end stall does. And this one's got a crack starting on the left front that you'll want to deal with before the ground freezes. He came and stood beside her, holding the lantern up so the light fell properly, and looked at what she was looking at. I see it, he said. It's not serious yet. No. He was quiet for a moment. How'd you know to look? Her gait was slightly uneven when I watched her walk to the trough this afternoon. Maybe 2 degrees off. You wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. I was out at the north fence this afternoon. I know, the horses were unattended for about 3 hours. She said it matter-of-factly, not as an accusation. They're fine, but 3 hours is long enough for small things to become bigger ones. Garrett leaned against the stall door. In the lantern light, he looked tired in the specific way of a man who had been tired for a long time and had stopped noticing it. My aunt tells me you asked to look at the pantry inventory, he said. I did. What did you find? Clara put the horse's hoof down and straightened. You have enough to get through about 3 weeks if the current rate of use stays the same, which it won't, because the weather is going to drive it up. More cooking, more staying indoors, more of everything. With rationing, I can stretch it to 6 weeks, maybe 7. She paused. You're going to need a supply run before the storm hits. I know, he said. I was planning one for next week. Next week may be too late. The weather's not... The weather's worse than you think, Claire said. I've been watching that sky since Bismarck. That's 400 miles of the same front, and it's moving faster than the forecast accounts for. If you're going to get a supply run done, you have 2 days, maybe 3. Garrett looked at her. The lantern made his face harder to read than it had been in daylight. You sound certain, he said. I've been wrong before, she said. Once. He was quiet again. Outside, the wind had picked up, moving along the barn wall with a sound like breathing. I'll send Danny tomorrow morning, he said. Send him tonight if you can, Clara said. The road's going to be worse by dawn. She watched something move through his expression, not quite resistance and not quite acceptance, something between the two, the feeling of a man recalculating. You're going to be difficult, he said. It didn't sound like a complaint, more like a man naming a thing he'd just discovered about the country he was standing in. Probably, Clara said, but I'm going to be right more often than I'm wrong. She picked up her lantern and walked back toward the house, and she heard him stand there for another moment before following. Danny left for town that night, grumbling, and came back the next morning with a wagon loaded heavier than he'd wanted to load it, and the snow started falling before he'd finished unloading. Not the storm, not yet. Just the advance, the first thin curtain of it, the way a storm announces itself before it commits. But it was enough. The road south was already softening by noon, and by supper time the temperature had dropped 12 degrees and kept going. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window and watched the snow fall and said, without turning around, He sent Danny last night? After some discussion, Clara said, He never sends anyone last night. He always thinks there's more time. Most people do, Clara said. Eleanor turned from the window. Her expression was the most unguarded Clara had seen it, something between relief and something else, something older and more complicated. The last woman the agency sent, Eleanor said. She stayed 4 days. She said the ranch was impossible and the winters were unacceptable, and she took the first available train. What was her name? Margaret. She was 28 and very pretty and had no interest whatsoever in what any of this actually was. Eleanor sat down heavily in her chair. Garrett didn't say much about it after. He never does, but he stopped. She paused. He started being very practical after that, very sensible, very focused on what needed doing. That's not always a bad way to be, Clara said. No, Eleanor agreed, but he stopped being other things too. Clara thought about that. She thought about Garrett's face in the lantern light and the way he'd watched her walk back to the house. Not the way a man watches a woman he's interested in, not quite, but not the way a man watches a problem he's managing either. Something still forming, something that hadn't named itself yet. I'm not here to fix that, Clara said. I know, Eleanor said. That's the first thing that might. The second day, one of the horses in the east paddock showed the signs. Clara saw it at the morning feed, the way the animal turned from its hay with a kind of indifference that was the opposite of how it had moved to the trough the day before. Not dramatic, not lying down, not shaking, not showing anything a man looking for obvious distress would catch. Just absent, behind the eyes, the way animals get when their body has started using its energy for something other than paying attention. She got Eleanor's liniment from the medicine shelf in the barn. She'd inventoried that too, quietly, the evening before. And she got warm water and she worked on that horse for 2 solid hours. And when Cal Wexler came in at mid-morning and saw what she was doing, he stopped and stared at her the way you stare at something you haven't cataloged yet. What's wrong with her, Wug? He asked. Getting ahead of something, Clara said. Hand me that cloth. He did, which surprised her slightly. She'd expected him to stand there. You know horses? He asked. Enough. Better than Danny, he said after a pause. Danny doesn't watch them. He just feeds them and leaves. Feeding and watching aren't the same thing, Clara said. No, Cal said. He sounded like someone who'd known that for a while without having a word for it. She saved the horse. Not dramatically. There was no crisis moment, no emergency, just the quiet business of catching a problem before it became one, which was its own kind of competence, even if it didn't look like anything from the outside. Garrett heard about it from Eleanor, not from Clara, which was how she'd wanted it. He came to find her in the afternoon, when she was working on the supply inventory in the kitchen, cross-referencing what Danny had brought against what was already there, and making careful notes in the ledger she'd found in the desk drawer. "Eleanor says you worked on Bess this morning," he said. "She was showing early signs," Clara said, without looking up from the ledger. "What kind of signs?" She told him. He listened. She watched him processing it with the same careful attention she'd noticed in him from the first. A man who took information seriously, who didn't dismiss things because they came from unexpected sources. "Danny didn't mention it," he said. "Danny didn't see it," Claire said. "He might, in time. He pays more attention than he lets on. He's young, and he's performing, and underneath it, he's watching everything. That'll either make him good at this, or just more careful about hiding that he isn't." Garrett looked at her in a way he'd been doing more frequently, a slightly off-balance look, like a man who keeps putting his foot down on ground he thought he knew, and finding it's not quite where he expected. "That's a complicated read on a kid who called you charity case yesterday," he said. So he'd heard that. She'd wondered. "He didn't say it to hurt me," Clara said. "He said it because he doesn't know what category to put me in, and uncertainty makes people talk." She finally looked up from the ledger. "He'll settle down once he decides I'm not going anywhere." "You are going somewhere," Garrett said. "In 9 days." "Yes," Clara said. "In the meantime." He looked at her for a moment longer, then looked at the ledger. "What are you finding?" "Your numbers and your actual stock don't match, not dangerously, but enough. Someone's been estimating instead of counting, probably since September." She turned the book to face him. "Look." He looked. She watched his face while he read, watched the moment he found the discrepancies she'd circled in the margin. "That's 3 weeks of hay short of where you thought you were," she said. "Not critical, but you'll need to account for it in the winter plan." He straightened up. He had his hand on the back of the chair, and she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was doing the arithmetic in his head. The mental recalculation of a man who'd believed he was in one position and had just been shown he was somewhere else. "I would have caught this in January," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "Probably. January would have been too late to fix it." "Yes," she said again. "It would." He stood there a moment, not comfortable, not uncomfortable, in the particular stillness of someone who has just received information they needed and isn't quite sure yet how to feel about who gave it to them. "Thank you," he said eventually. "It's what I said I'd do," Clara told him. "Earn my place." She turned back to the ledger. He stood there another moment before he left. On the 4th night, the real storm came. It didn't arrive the way storms do in stories, with dramatic buildup, with portent and warning. It arrived the way real bad weather on the northern plains always arrived, faster than expected and worse than forecast, and with a total indifference to anyone's plans. Clara was awake when it started, because she'd been watching the sky for 2 days and she'd gone to bed with her clothes on. She was downstairs in the kitchen with the lamp when she heard the first full weight of the wind hit the north wall of the house. Not a gust, a wall of it, sustained and building, the kind of wind that didn't push at things but leaned on them, permanently, as if it had always been there and everything else was just visiting. She had the stove banked up already and water heating. She had the supply list she'd made 2 days earlier beside the stove. She had, in her head, the map of the property that she'd been assembling since the first morning. Where the buildings were, how they connected, where the weaknesses were. She heard Garrett's boots on the stairs before she heard him call out, "Mrs. Ashcroft?" "Kitchen," she said. He came in still pulling his coat on. He stopped when he saw the lamp lit and the stove going and the kettle already heating. He looked at her. "How long have you been up?" he asked. "About an hour," she said. "We need to talk about the freight warehouse." "The old one by the station?" "Yes." "Do you know its condition?" "It's been empty since spring. I haven't—" He stopped. "Why?" "Because if the storm is as bad as I think it is, you're going to have workers who can't make it back from the north pasture. and the station is closer than this house, and that warehouse is the only structure between here and the fence line that's large enough to hold people and stay standing in this kind of wind. She poured him coffee without asking. When's the last time you were inside it? March, maybe. Is the roof sound? Sound enough. That's not the same as yes. Sound enough for a hard winter, he said, taking the coffee. The walls are solid. It was built for freight, not comfort, and freight doesn't care about comfort. Good, Clara said. That's what we need. She turned to face him fully. And there's something else. She told him about the drainage system then, the things she'd noticed her second day there, following the line of it with her eyes while she'd walked the perimeter of the station grounds. An old system, dug into the embankment when the rail line was first laid, designed to channel meltwater away from the tracks. It ran, if she'd read the grade correctly, in the direction of the ranch wells. If we can redirect it, she said, even partially, when the snow starts to melt off the roof of that warehouse. It won't work, Garrett said. The grade is wrong. The grade is wrong for the original design, Clara said, but the original design was routing water away from the tracks, not toward anything. If you change the diversion point, you'd need to dig. Yes, before the ground freezes completely, which means tonight or tomorrow morning before the storm peaks. She looked at him steadily. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. He put down the coffee cup. He looked at the window where the snow was coming horizontally now, white streaks against the black. You've been planning this, he said. Since when? Since the second day, Claire said. I didn't know if I'd need it. I hoped I wouldn't. Why didn't you say something sooner? Because you were still deciding whether to trust my inventory notes, she said, without heat. You can't give people more information than they're ready to use. He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the window. Then he said, Wake Danny. They worked through the rest of the night and into the dawn. It was not elegant work. Danny Polk dug in the frozen ground with the focused fury of a young man who has discovered, mid-task, that he is capable of more than he thought and isn't sure how he feels about that. Cal Wexler, who had come in ahead of the storm by luck more than planning, worked beside him. Garrett worked at the diversion point itself, and Clara directed, because she had the picture in her head and they didn't, and because her back was not going to survive 4 hours of hard digging at 57 years old, and she didn't pretend otherwise. Pete Wexler arrived with 2 other workers from the north, half frozen, and they were directed to the warehouse and the business of making it habitable. Eleanor Hale watched from the window of the house and didn't pretend she wasn't watching. By the time the full weight of the storm arrived, the real thing, the kind that blanked the sky and made 20 feet of visibility feel generous, the warehouse was banked with snow on the windward side, which was the natural insulation of the plains. And there were 7 people in it with a working stove and 3 days of supplies and water coming through the re-roaded drainage in a thin but steady stream. It wasn't comfortable. It was sufficient. That was the difference between surviving and not surviving, and Clara Ashcroft had spent 57 years learning where that line was. Danny Polk sat across the warehouse from her at some point in the second day, when the storm was at its worst and conversation was the only thing left to do, and he looked at her with an expression that had lost most of the performance she'd seen in it the first morning. How did you know? He asked. About what? Any of it. The horse. The drainage. He gestured at the warehouse, at the stove, at the 7 people who were cold and bored and alive. Clara thought about it for a moment. You pay attention long enough, she said, and things start telling you what they need. The land does it. Animals do it. People do it. You just have to get quiet enough to hear. She paused. Most people stop paying attention when they decide they already know what something is. Danny looked at his hands. I thought you were... He stopped. I know what you thought, Clara said. It's all right. It's not, he said. It's not all right, actually. Clara looked at him. He looked up, and his face was younger than she'd seen it before, younger than 25, younger than the performance had allowed. I'm sorry, he said. For what I said. Apology accepted, Clara said. Now, Tell me what you know about the east fence, because I've been trying to figure out the repair sequence and I need to know which posts are original and which ones Garrett replaced last spring. He blinked at her, then slowly he started talking about the fence. The storm broke on the third day. Not cleanly. Nothing about the northern plains broke cleanly. It petered out the way it had come in, by degrees. The wind dropping first, then the snow thinning from a wall to a curtain to a scatter of flakes that seemed almost apologetic after what had preceded them. The sky went from white to gray, to the specific pale blue of extreme cold, cloudless and sharp-edged, the kind of sky that looked beautiful and meant business. Clara was the first one out of the warehouse. She stood in the snow and looked at the ranch, and the ranch looked back at her the way damaged things always did, not defeated exactly, but showing its costs. Drifts had buried the lower half of the fence line along the south pasture. The barn's east-facing wall had lost 3 boards from the upper section, which had probably happened sometime in the second night based on the sound she'd tracked without mentioning to anyone. The water trough she'd identified as a problem in her first hour on the property had cracked the rest of the way through and was sitting in 2 pieces in a drift of snow. She had known about the trough. She should have pushed harder on that one. She filed that too, not as a failure exactly, but as the kind of information you kept so you wouldn't make the same calculation twice. Behind her, the warehouse door opened and Danny Polk came out, squinting in the sudden light, his breath making clouds in the cold air. He looked at the fence. He looked at the trough. He looked at Clara, looking at both of them. "Bad," he said. "Could have been worse," she said. "That's a real low bar." "Most bars worth clearing are," Clara said. "Get Cal and start with the fence boards. The ones on the south pasture, not the north. The cattle need the south pasture accessible before anything else." He looked at her for a moment, and she waited for the resistance she'd learned to expect from young men being directed by women who weren't their mothers or their bosses. It didn't come. He just nodded and went back inside to get Cal, and Clara stood in the snow and let herself feel, for exactly 30 seconds, the specific exhaustion of 3 days in a warehouse with 7 people and a stove that smoked when the wind shifted. 30 seconds. Then she started walking toward the barn to check the horses. Garrett caught up with her halfway there. He'd been out earlier. She'd heard him moving around at first light, before she'd gotten up herself, which she suspected was intentional, a rancher's instinct to assess damage before anyone else was awake, so he could process it privately before having to discuss it publicly. His face had that worked-over quality now, the look of someone who had already done his first round of arithmetic and hadn't loved the numbers. "Trough's gone," he said, falling into step beside her. "I know, I should have pushed that harder before the storm." He glanced at her sideways. "It was on the list." "Lists don't fix troughs," she said. "I should have made it a priority." He was quiet for a moment. "You saved 7 people and the cattle and the wells. I think you're allowed to have missed a water trough." "Allowed doesn't mean I did it right," Clara said. He didn't answer that, which she appreciated. Some people rushed in to disagree when you held yourself to account, and it always felt like they were trying to make themselves comfortable rather than take you seriously. Garrett Hale, she had noticed, had a capacity for silence that was rarer than he probably knew. They reached the barn and went in together, and the warmth of the animals hit them both. That specific living warmth that was the best argument for tending livestock through hard winters, the way 700 pounds of horse turned cold air into something almost bearable. Bess was standing at her feed and eating properly, which was the first good news of the morning. Clara went to her and ran a hand along her neck and checked the things she always checked, and Bess put her nose briefly against Clara's shoulder in the way horses did when they'd been well handled and recognized the hand that had handled them. "She remembers you," Garrett said from the stall door. "Animals usually know who's paid attention to them," Clara said. She heard something in the silence that followed that she didn't name. She finished with Bess and moved to the next stall, and Garrett moved with her, not in a way that crowded her, but in the way of someone who had things to say and was working out how to say them. "The drainage system worked," he said finally. "I know. I checked the wells before I came out. The water level is... I've never seen it that stable after a storm like this." "The reroute was rough," Clara said. "You'll want to do it properly in the spring, with the right grade and proper pipe if you can get it. What we did is going to shift with the thaw." "I know." He paused. Clara. It was the first time he'd used her first name. She didn't make anything of it in her face, but she registered it. I need to know what else you see, he said. Not just what needs immediate fixing. Everything. All of it. He stopped. I've been running this ranch for 6 years and I thought I knew where the problems were. You've been here 5 days and you found 3 things I missed. 4, she said, without thinking. What's the 4th? She hesitated. Then she said, your supply arrangement with the trading post in town. The pricing you're getting on salt and grain isn't the standard rate. I saw the receipts in the ledger, not because I was looking for them. They were between the inventory pages. You're paying about 15% above what the Hendersons' ranch is paying, based on the numbers I've seen, and the quality markers in the notation suggest you're getting the same stock. Garrett was very still. Mercer's been supplying us for 3 years, he said. I know, Clara said. That's probably why. He was quiet for a long moment. She moved to the 3rd stall and checked the feed and didn't push. All right, he said at last. All right. What else? The east fence is worse than the south fence. The posts Danny told me about, 6 of them are the originals, not the replacements, and 3 of those are rotted below the soil line. You won't see it from the top. The fence looks serviceable until it falls over. She moved to the next stall. And the pasture rotation. You've been using the north pasture in the fall, which makes sense for the geography, but the drainage there is poor and you're getting soil compaction that's going to affect the spring growth. Rotating the cattle through the south pasture first, the 2 weeks before the ground freezes, would give the north pasture time to… Stop, Garrett said. Clara stopped. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite catalog. Not overwhelmed, not offended, something more complicated than either. How do you know all of this? He asked. I paid attention, she said, and I've been doing this since I was 25 years old on a farm that was worse off than this one when I married into it. She paused, and I had nothing else to do with my evenings. He looked at her for another moment. Then he laughed. It was brief. Not a polished, comfortable laugh, but the surprised, slightly unwilling kind. The laugh of someone who has been caught off guard by something and laughed before they could decide whether to. It changed his face for a second, took 10 years off it, and then was gone. The pasture rotation, he said. Tell me the sequence you're thinking. She told him. The town of Red Hollow had roughly 230 permanent residents, a trading post, a bank, a 2-room schoolhouse, a doctor who was gone more often than he was there, and the comprehensive social memory of any small frontier settlement, which meant everyone knew everyone's business and had opinions about it. Word about Clara had been circulating since the day she arrived, expanded by the storm story in the way that stories expand in isolated places where entertainment is scarce and consequence is close. By the time Garrett drove her into town 4 days after the storm to handle some necessary supply business, she was aware, from Eleanor, who had a remarkable intelligence network for a woman who rarely left the house, that she had become a topic. She was prepared for the stares. She had lived among people long enough to know that being stared at was just another form of attention, and attention was just another form of information being gathered. What she wasn't quite prepared for was Martha Brennan. Martha Brennan ran the general store with her husband, who was frequently ill and therefore frequently absent, which had long ago made Martha the de facto operator. She was maybe 50, vigorous in the way of women who have always had to be vigorous, with bright eyes and an expression that Clara recognized, the expression of a woman who was very good at knowing things. "You're Mrs. Ashcroft," Martha said when Clara came in. "I am," Clara said. "I heard about the warehouse," Martha said, "and the drainage. Danny Polk was in here 2 days ago, and he talked about it for 45 minutes straight, and Danny Polk doesn't talk for 45 minutes straight about anything." "He tends toward economy," Clara agreed. "He said you knew the storm was coming before anyone else." "I watched the sky." Martha looked at her the way people look when they suspect they're being told the truth, but had been hoping for something more interesting. "That's it?" "That's most of it," Clara said. The rest was just doing the arithmetic when other people weren't doing it yet. Martha came around the counter. She was the kind of woman who talked better when she was moving, Clara noticed. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." What are you actually planning to do when the train comes? It was a blunter question than Clara had expected, and she appreciated it for that. Go home, Clara said. To Nebraska? To wherever's practical from Omaha. She paused. My children are scattered. I don't have a particular home to go back to. Then why are you leaving? Clara looked at her. Because the arrangement didn't work out. That happens. The arrangement, Martha said, in a tone that made it clear she had opinions about the word. Garrett Hale is not a stupid man. No, Clara agreed. He's not. He's also not a man who changes his mind easily or quickly. I've noticed that, Clara said. But he's changing it, Martha said. She stopped, started again. People in this town have known Garrett Hale for 6 years. 6 years is long enough to know the shape of a person, what they're like when things are easy and what they're like when things aren't. He's a decent man. He's also a closed-up one, and he's been that way since long before you got here. She paused. What I'm saying is, he's not the kind of man who makes room for people easily, and he's been making room. Clara considered this. Mrs. Brennan, she said, I appreciate what you're trying to— I'm not trying to do anything, Martha said. I'm telling you what I see. What you do with it is your business. She went back behind the counter. Now, what do you need? Clara told her, and they spent 20 minutes on practical business, and Clara paid attention to the pricing without mentioning the Mercer situation because that wasn't her conversation to have. And when she left, she carried a package under one arm and a number of things to think about that she hadn't arrived with. Wallace Pruitt came to the ranch that afternoon. He came without sending word ahead, which was either confidence or calculation, and he came with a man Clara didn't recognize. Younger, city clothes, the kind of coat that announced money without announcing taste. Garrett was in the equipment shed when they rode up, and Clara was at the kitchen table working on a letter, and Eleanor was asleep in her chair, and Danny Polk was the first one to see them from the barn. He came to find Clara first. She wasn't sure what to make of that, but she filed it. She went to the door and saw Pruitt dismounting in the yard, and she felt the particular internal stillness that came over her in situations that required it. Not calm, exactly, not the absence of something, but the active choosing of steadiness over reaction. Garrett came out of the equipment shed with his hands dirty and a look on his face that was the frontier version of closed. Pruitt, he said. Not a greeting, acknowledgement. Hale! Pruitt looked around the yard, at the repaired fence boards Danny and Cal had already gotten to, at the cleared paths, at the general evidence of a property that had come through a hard storm in working condition. His expression didn't change, but Clara, watching from the doorway, thought she saw something move through it, recalculation of some kind. Impressive, he said, after a storm like that. We managed, Garrett said. I heard. Pruitt glanced toward the house, toward Clara. She's the one who organized the warehouse situation? We all did, Garrett said. That's not what Danny Polk is telling people in town. Danny Polk talks too much, Garrett said. What can I do for you, Wallace? Pruitt's companion had stayed on his horse, Clara noticed. She didn't know if that was deliberate, a statement of intention, a readiness to leave, or simply the habit of a man who was more comfortable mounted. This is Edmund Harlow, Pruitt said. He represents the Meridian Land Company out of Chicago. Garrett's expression didn't change in the way most people's would have, but Clara saw his hands, and his hands stopped moving. I know who the Meridian Land Company is, Garrett said. Then you know they've been acquiring grazing land in the territory for the past 2 years, Pruitt said. Edmund has an offer to discuss. I thought it might be worth your time to hear it. I'm not selling, Garrett said. You haven't heard the number, Pruitt said. Doesn't matter. Garrett, Pruitt's voice shifted, not threatening, something more careful than that, something that was almost concern. The winter hit everyone hard, the fence lines, the losses. I know your season wasn't good before the storm. The numbers that Meridian is— Are you having trouble with your own numbers, Wallace? Garrett asked. Is that what this is? Pruitt's jaw tightened. I'm passing on information. You can pass it somewhere else, Garrett said. I appreciate you coming out, but the answer's no. Pruitt looked at the house again, looked at Clara. The widow's idea? He said. Holding on to a struggling property? My idea, Garrett said, and there was a flatness in his voice now that Clara recognized. Not anger, the thing underneath anger, the bedrock you find when the topsoil's been stripped away. Mine. Same as it's always been. Pruitt held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once, the nod of a man whose registered information he'll be processing later, and turned back to his horse. Edmund Harlow had already started his horse toward the road. They left without another word. Garrett stood in the yard until they'd gone from sight. Clara stayed in the doorway. They'll come back, she said. Yes, he said. The offer is going to be in the paperwork regardless of what you said. They leave offers in paperwork. She paused. Have you had any unusual correspondence from the Territory Land Office lately? Anything about surveys or boundary adjustments? He turned and looked at her. Why? Because that's how Meridian works, she said. Not just in the territory, it's the pattern. They acquire parcels on the edges of properties they want. Then they push on boundary lines. Then the land office gets involved. Then the legal question becomes expensive enough that... She stopped. My neighbor in Nebraska, Frank Heller. He lost 40 acres that way. Not to Meridian specifically, but the same method. Garrett walked to the door. He stopped close enough that she could see the cold still in his face from the outdoor air, the specific exhausted set of his eyes. How do you know about Meridian? He asked. My son-in-law reads the financial papers, Clara said. He talks about what he reads. I listen. She met his eyes. Do you have the land office correspondence? In the desk, he said. Can I look at it? He held her gaze for a moment. Yes, he said. Come in. There were 4 letters from the Territory Land Office in the past 6 months. Clara sat at the desk in the front room and read them while Garrett stood near the window and watched the road as if Pruitt might come back. The letters were individually unremarkable. Routine correspondence about survey updates, a note about easement documentation, a request for boundary markers to be confirmed following a neighbor's parcel transfer. The kind of bureaucratic mail that accumulated on busy ranchers' desks and got filed in piles because none of it seemed urgent. Taken together, they were a pattern. Your northeast boundary, Clara said, the one that follows the rail easement. What about it? The survey reference in this letter from August, she held it up, uses a benchmark marker that's different from the one in your original deed. Garrett came away from the window. Show me, he said. She showed him. He read the letter, then the deed, then the letter again. That's... He stopped. A small discrepancy, Claire said. About 40 feet on paper, which doesn't sound like much until you look at where those 40 feet sit. She spread the deed on the desk and traced the line with her finger. The northeast corner. If that boundary shifts 40 feet southwest, and a survey benchmark change is exactly how you do it on paper, you lose the access to the creek branch that waters the east pasture. He was very still. Without that water access, he said slowly, the east pasture is unusable in dry years, Clara said, and Red Hollow has been getting drier based on the water level markings I've seen in the well records. What was a decent pasture 10 years ago is going to be a marginal one in 5. And if the boundary shifts, you'd have to negotiate water rights from whoever owns the northeast parcel, Clara said, which is currently unoccupied territory land, which Meridian could acquire. She looked up at him. They're not trying to buy your ranch outright, Garrett. They're trying to make parts of it useless enough that you'll sell at their price. The room was very quiet. Outside, Danny Polk was shouting something to Cal about a fence post, and the ordinary sound of it seemed to come from very far away. This is what they did to Frank Heller, Clara said. Your neighbor, Garrett said. My neighbor, she confirmed. He didn't catch it until the survey was finalized. Once it's in the record, it's legal, Garrett said. It's legal, she agreed. He put both hands on the desk and looked at the deed and the letter and the 40 feet that could matter enormously or not at all depending on what happened in the next few months. I need a lawyer, he said. You need a surveyor first, Clara said, before anyone touches that benchmark, and you need to file a formal challenge with the land office before the August survey gets incorporated into the official record. She looked at the date on the letter. You have about 3 weeks. He looked at her. You know how to file a land office challenge? I know what Frank Heller should have done, Clara said, which is not the same thing, but it's a start. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't understand you. What don't you understand? You've been here. He stopped. You were supposed to be here 11 days, and you've... He stopped again. You're not... He made a sound that was almost a laugh, but tired. You're not what I was expecting. I know I said that at the station, but I meant it differently then. I know, Clara said. How long have you known about the Meridian situation? Since I read the correspondence 2 days ago, she said. I didn't say anything sooner because I wasn't sure of the pattern. I wanted to be sure before I... She paused. I didn't want to alarm you over something I'd misread. You could have been wrong, he said. I could have, she said. I'm not, but I could have been. He straightened up. He put his hand briefly on the back of the chair, not reaching for her, just resting there, a man steadying himself in a room that had just rearranged itself. I'll send for the surveyor tomorrow, he said. Send today, Clara said. The weather's going to turn again by the end of the week. He looked at her. How do you know that? I've been watching the sky, she said. He shook his head. Not disagreement, something else. Something she chose not to examine too closely. Yeah. Eleanor found her that evening in the kitchen after supper, after Garrett had gone out to check the stock, after Danny and the Wexler brothers had gone home. Clara was mending one of the harness straps she'd put aside when the storm started, working by lamplight with the careful stitches of someone who'd learned not to waste thread. Eleanor sat down across from her without preamble. Pruitt came by, she said. Yes. And there's land company trouble. There might be, Clara said. Garrett's handling it. With your help. Clara didn't answer that directly. She made 3 more stitches. You know what I think? Eleanor said. I suspect you'll tell me. I think you came here by accident, Eleanor said. And I think that might be the best thing that's happened to this ranch in 6 years. She paused. Garrett asked the agency for youth. You know what youth is? Youth is someone who doesn't know yet what they don't know. Someone who hasn't paid for anything. She looked at the window, at the dark outside it. He asked for youth, and the railroad delivered wisdom, and he was too busy being surprised to be grateful. He's not ungrateful, Clara said. No, he's scared. Eleanor turned back from the window. He built this ranch into something real, and then he almost lost it in 2 bad winters, and he's been making very practical decisions ever since because practical decisions feel like control. You can't control a feeling, but you can control a supply run and a fence line. Clara set down the harness strap. Eleanor Samam, she said carefully. I leave in 5 days. You keep saying that, Eleanor said, because it's true. Truth changes, Eleanor said. That's the one thing I know for certain after 75 years. What's true on Tuesday is sometimes a different thing by Saturday. Clara picked up the harness strap and went back to her mending. Eleanor watched her work for a while without saying anything more, and the lamp burned between them, and outside the wind moved across the plains with no particular destination. The day before the train was scheduled, 3 things happened. The first was that the surveyor came and confirmed Clara's reading of the boundary discrepancy. He was a methodical man named Art Sweeney, who smelled of pipe tobacco and looked at Clara with the expression of someone who doesn't know how to process being corrected by a woman about land surveying and has decided to just accept it and move on. He spent 4 hours on the property and left a written preliminary assessment that used words like irregularity and documentation error and disputed benchmark in ways that made Garrett's jaw tighten and his eyes go careful. You'll want this in front of the land office before Christmas, Art Sweeney said. The filing procedure takes time. We know, Clara said. Sweeney looked at her. You've done this before? I know someone who didn't, she said. Same result. He nodded slowly. I can draw up the formal challenge documentation. Take me a few days. Send it to town care of Martha Brennan, Garrett said. She'll see it gets to me. When Sweeney had gone, Garrett stood in the yard with the preliminary assessment in his hand and looked at it for a long moment. It's actually there, he said. Yes, Clara said. If you hadn't... He stopped. You would have caught it eventually, Clara said. Maybe, he said. Maybe not before it was in the record. He looked up. Either way, Clara. Yes. Thank you. She nodded once and went inside to help Eleanor with lunch, because gratitude was important, but the soup was going to burn if nobody attended to it. The second thing that happened was Danny Polk asking her to look at the north fence posts. Not Garrett asking him to show her, not her going of her own initiative, Danny coming to find her specifically, pulling on his coat and saying, I want to show you those 6 posts I told you about, the ones I think are rotted below ground, because I want to know what you think we should do. They spent an hour and a half at the north fence in the cold, and she showed him how to read the rot below the soil line, and he showed her 2 posts she'd missed in her initial assessment, and by the end of it they were having an actual conversation about fence construction philosophy, which she had not expected and which was the best kind of surprise. You're going to know all of this by spring, she said when they were walking back. I didn't know any of it 3 weeks ago, he said. It came out differently than the way he'd said things in the first days, less defended, more just stated. That's how it works, she said. You're paying attention now. That's what matters. He was quiet for a moment. Then, are you really leaving tomorrow? The train comes tomorrow, yes. That's not what I asked, Danny said. She looked at him. He looked at the ground, then back up, with the directness of someone who had decided to say something and committed to it. He watches you. Not in a way that's... He stopped. I've worked for Garrett Hale for 2 years, and I've never seen him watch anybody the way he watches you, like he's trying to figure something out that keeps changing while he's figuring. Clara made herself walk normally, steadily. Danny, she said, mind your business. Yes, ma'am, he said, without any particular shame. They walked back to the ranch in silence that was comfortable enough to let her think, and she thought all the way to the kitchen door and didn't let any of it show. The third thing that happened was a telegram arriving in the late afternoon from the matrimonial agency in Omaha, addressed to Garrett Hale. Clara was not there when he read it. She found out about it from Eleanor, who had been present, and Eleanor told her with the careful neutrality of someone who was watching a situation and trying not to influence it while also being unable to entirely pretend it wasn't happening. The telegram said that the original bride intended for Garrett's arrangement, not Evelyn Cross, who remained unaccounted for, but a woman named Ruth Gallagher, 23 years old, recently relocated from Cincinnati, was now available and willing to honor the contract, and would be arriving on the eastbound line within the week, pending his confirmation. Clara heard this and said nothing, and went to finish packing her bag. She had most of it done already. She was not a woman who left things to the last minute. Eleanor watched her fold a blouse and place it in the carpet bag, and Eleanor's expression was the most complicated thing Clara had seen on a human face in several months, which was saying something given the past 3 weeks. You're not going to say anything, Eleanor said. No, Clara said. To him. No. Clara. Eleanor. Clara set down what she was folding and looked at the older woman directly. He came to that station for a reason. He made an arrangement for a reason. He needs what a young wife can give him. Children, maybe, or just the kind of future that starts fresh instead of midway through. I'm not going to make that complicated for him. She paused. I've been useful here. I'm glad I was. That's real, and I'll carry it with me. But useful isn't the same as necessary, and it's not... She stopped. Eleanor looked at her with eyes that were absolutely clear and did not offer comfort she didn't mean. It's not the same as wanted, Eleanor said. Clara picked up the blouse and finished folding it. Good night, Eleanor, she said. Eleanor left without arguing, which was the most respectful thing she could have done. Clara finished packing in the lamplight, and when the bag was done, she set it by the door and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the wall for a while, and let herself feel the specific weight of things she was choosing not to say because there was nobody watching, and she was 57 years old, and she had earned the right to feel what she felt in private before she decided how to carry it in public. Then she went to sleep, because the train was early, and she had always believed in being rested for whatever came next. She was up before 4. Not because she'd slept badly. She'd slept the way she always slept when she'd made a decision she intended to keep, which was deeply and without argument. But old habits didn't care about decisions. And 57 years of early mornings had built something in her body that functioned independently of her intentions. And so she was dressed and in the kitchen before the stove had been touched, working by the light of a single lamp, making breakfast for a household she was leaving. She made biscuits from the last of the good flour, the kind she'd been rationing since she'd reorganized the pantry, saving it for a moment that mattered. She made a proper gravy, thick enough, the way she'd learned in Nebraska when thin gravy meant a hard week. She cut the last of the smoked pork shoulder into slices and got them in the pan, and the smell of it moved through the cold house the way good food always did, finding the cracks, going around corners, reaching people before they were ready to be reached. She heard Garrett's boots on the stairs at 5:15. He stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the table, set properly, everything laid out, the lamp burning and the stove full, and the kind of breakfast that took time and intention. And then he looked at her, and his face did the thing it did sometimes where it almost settled into an expression and then caught itself. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," Clara said. "Sit down." He sat. She put coffee in front of him and went back to the stove, and they were both quiet in the way of people who have things to say and have agreed without discussing it to let the food come first. Eleanor came down at 5:30, assessed the situation in one look, and sat down without a word. She ate with the deliberate appreciation of a woman who understood that certain meals were more than their ingredients, and she didn't say anything about the packed carpet bag sitting by the kitchen door, and neither did Garrett. And Clara served and ate and cleaned up with the same steady attention she'd brought to everything in this house for 19 days. Danny Polk arrived at 6:30 to start the morning chores, came in through the back for coffee, as he apparently always did, and stopped dead when he saw the breakfast laid out and Clara's bag by the door. He looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at the table. Danny poured his coffee and sat down and stared into it. "Train's at 8:10, he said, to no one in particular. "I know when the train is," Clara said. Silence. "Cal's going to handle the east fence post wrong," Danny said. "He always angles the post before it's set, and then the angle holds wrong when the ground freezes." "Show him the other way," Clara said. "You know the other way now." Danny wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. He looked younger than she'd ever seen him, the performance entirely gone, and she felt something in her chest that she recognized as fondness and chose not to examine. Garrett pushed back from the table. "I'll get the wagon," he said. The road to Red Hollow Station was 7 miles, and the cold had the sharp, clarifying quality of true winter mornings. The kind of cold that didn't bother arguing, just stated itself plainly and expected you to deal with it. Clara sat on the wagon seat with her carpet bag between her feet and watched the frozen plain and kept her hands folded in her lap and thought about nothing in particular, which was the closest she could get to thinking about the things she wasn't going to say. Garrett drove and didn't talk, which she had come to understand was not indifference with him but the opposite. He went quiet when he was full of something, the way some people went loud. They were 4 miles out when he said, "The Land Office Challenge." "Art Sweeney will have the documentation to Martha Brennan by Thursday," Clara said. "She'll hold it for you. You need to file it yourself, in person, at the territorial office. Don't send Danny. They'll take it more seriously if you appear in person." "I know that part," Garrett said. "I know you do. I'm just saying it." "The northeast boundary marker," he said. "If Meridian contests the survey, they will. I need somebody who can read those letters the way you did, pattern and all." "Martha Brennan is sharper than she lets on," Clara said. "She won't do the legal work, but she'll see the pattern if you show her what to look for. And your lawyer, do you have a lawyer?" "I have a man in Bismarck who handles contracts." "Get him to look at the land office correspondence. All of it, not just the August letter, the whole 6 months." She paused. "The pattern only shows when you have all of it together." He nodded. His hands moved slightly on the reins, adjusting to something in the horse's step, and she'd been watching those hands long enough now to know that the small adjustment meant he was thinking rather than paying attention to the road. "The pasture rotation," he said. "The sequence you told me. South pasture first, 3 weeks before hard freeze. North pasture gets the spring rest. Rotate back in May, not March, regardless of how the weather looks in April." "March looks fine every single year," he said. "And the north pasture looks beaten down every single June," she said. Wait until May. He was quiet for another mile. The station was coming into view, the platform, the signal light, the low rectangular shape of the building against the pale sky. She could see smoke from Finch's stove inside. The horses, Garrett said. Watch the feed before you watch the animal. I know you know this, but watch the feed. Bess will tell you when something's wrong with the others before they tell you themselves. She's the most sensitive to changes in the barn atmosphere. If she's off her feed and the others aren't, check the others anyway. She paused. And the crack in the left front hoof. Have the farrier in before the first thaw. Don't wait until you can see it's gotten worse. I know, he said. I know you know, she said. I'm still saying it. He brought the wagon to a stop at the platform. The station was quiet, the way frontier stations always were between trains, a held breath kind of quiet, the quiet of a place that existed only in relation to arrivals and departures. Clara picked up her carpet bag and climbed down from the wagon before he could offer help, not because she didn't want it, but because she needed to be standing on her own feet for what came next. Garrett, she said. Clara, he said. He was still on the wagon. Thank you for the shelter, she said, and the work. I meant what I said that first day. I earned my place. You did, he said, and more. She nodded. She walked to the platform. She heard him sit there for a moment, heard the horse shift, heard the particular silence of a man who is not moving when he expected himself to move. And then she heard him climb down, heard his boots on the frozen ground, heard him walk toward the platform steps. But she didn't turn around, because the eastbound whistle had sounded in the distance, carried flat and thin across the winter air, and she had made her decision and she intended to keep it, and if she turned around right now, she wasn't sure she'd be able to say the same. She was still standing with her back to him when the second train arrived. Not the eastbound, the westbound, coming from Bismarck, moving in the other direction, pulling in on the opposite track, routine and unremarkable. It was the woman who got off the westbound that was neither. She was young in the way that 23 genuinely is young, not young like a description, but young in her bones and her skin and the way she moved, a kind of forward momentum that comes before the world has had enough chances to push back. Her coat was a deep burgundy, expensive and slightly impractical for frontier weather, and she had the look of someone who had come prepared to be brave about something she wasn't entirely sure she'd prepared for correctly. Finch came out of the station office with his hat already in his hands. He apparently kept it there permanently when anything complicated was happening, and spoke to her briefly, gesturing toward the platform where Clara and Garrett stood on opposite ends. The young woman looked at Garrett first, then at Clara, then back at Garrett. She walked toward him with the directness of someone who had decided, on the train, that directness was the policy she'd be using. Mr. Hale, she said, I'm Ruth Gallagher. I sent the telegram from Omaha. She extended her hand. I'm sorry for the short notice. Garrett shook her hand. Miss Gallagher, I wasn't sure you were. The telegram said within the week. I was already en route, she said. I decided after I sent the telegram. She had a clear voice, clear eyes, the eyes of someone who was scared and refusing to perform otherwise. I know there's been confusion with the arrangement. I wanted to come see the situation for myself before making any decisions. That's reasonable, Garrett said. Yes. Ruth looked at Clara again, directly, the way a person looks when they're taking inventory. You're Mrs. Ashcroft. I am, Clara said. The telegram I received from the agency mentioned that you'd been staying at the ranch, due to the train delay. That's correct. Ruth Gallagher looked at her for a moment longer with those clear, taking inventory eyes. Then she looked at Garrett. Then she looked at the platform between them, at Clara's carpet bag, at the distance between where each of them was standing, at the whole architecture of the situation laid out in front of her like a map. I see, she said, in a tone that suggested she did. Aldous Finch was making himself extremely busy with a crate near the station door. Miss Gallagher, Garrett said, you've had a long journey. Why don't we... There's coffee inside, and we can talk properly. In a moment, Ruth said. She turned back to Clara with a composure that Clara found herself genuinely respecting. The composure of a young woman who had not yet had it tested seriously but was doing her level best. "Mrs. Ashcroft, can I ask you something directly?" "You can ask," Clara said. "Are you leaving because you want to, or because you think you should?" The question landed like a stone in still water. Finch's crate activity stopped completely. Clara looked at Ruth Gallagher, at 23 years old, in the burgundy coat and the eyes that were scared and clear at the same time, and made a quick and private decision about the kind of honesty the moment required. "That's a complicated question," Clara said. "I know," Ruth said. "That's why I asked it directly." She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. "I grew up in Cincinnati. I know exactly one thing about the frontier, and it's that it takes a specific kind of person. I've been trying to figure out, on the train, whether I'm that person." She paused. "I've been reading the letters from the agency. All of them. They describe you. Not by name. They don't use names, but the description fits. As someone who reorganized the supply stores, diagnosed sick livestock, redirected a water drainage system during a blizzard, and identified a potential land fraud scheme against this property. All in under 3 weeks." She let that sit for a moment. "I've been trying to imagine doing any one of those things, and I can't." "You'd learn," Clara said. "Everyone learns, if they pay attention." "Maybe," Ruth said, "but there's learning and there's already knowing. And that ranch doesn't have time for me to learn what you already know." She looked at Garrett. "Does it?" It was not entirely a question. Garrett stood very still. He had the expression of a man watching a conversation happen that he hadn't been given a script for, and unlike most men in that situation, he wasn't trying to take the script away from anyone. "It's not," he started. "Mr. Hale," Ruth said, gently but clearly, "I came here to honor an arrangement because I said I would, and I keep my word, but I came here to see the situation first, because I also believe that keeping your word should make things better for everyone involved, and if it doesn't, then the arrangement was the wrong one." She looked at Clara again. "And I don't think I'm the wrong part of this arrangement." The eastbound whistle sounded again, closer now. 3 minutes. Maybe 4. Clara picked up her carpet bag. "Miss Gallagher," she said, "I think you're going to do perfectly well wherever you end up." "I think so too," Ruth said steadily. "I just don't think it's here." She turned to Garrett, and Clara started walking toward the far end of the platform because the train was coming, and she had made her decision, and Ruth Gallagher had said what she'd said, and none of it changed the arithmetic of what Clara was. She heard them talking behind her, low voices, not the words, and she kept walking, and the cold came up off the platform boards through the soles of her boots, and the sky was that hard pale blue that meant deep winter without apology. She was at the far end of the platform when she heard Ruth Gallagher's voice raised slightly to carry, "Mrs. Ashcroft." Clara stopped, turned. Ruth was standing in the middle of the platform. Garrett was beside her, and his face had changed into something Clara couldn't read from this distance. "The agency will find me another placement," Ruth said. "I'm young, and I'm capable, and there are 100 ranches in this territory." She paused. "There's only one of you." Then she walked into the station building, and the door closed behind her, and it was just Clara and Garrett, and the sound of the approaching train. He crossed the platform in the particular way of a man who has stopped thinking and started moving, which she'd learned was the most honest version of any person, when the thinking stops and the body just goes where it needs to go. He stopped 3 feet from her. "The train's coming," Clara said. "I know," Garrett said. "In about 2 minutes." "Clara," he said. "Stop." She stopped talking. "I sent for a wife," he said, "because the ranch needed, because I thought I needed." He stopped, started over. "I had a list in my head of what I was looking for, and you don't match any of it." "I know," she said. "You're 57, he said. "I'm aware." "You've already raised a family and buried a husband and run a farm for 20 years, and you know more about ranching than I do in 3 specific areas, and you're—" He stopped. "You infuriate me sometimes. You know that." "I've noticed," she said. You tell me things I don't want to hear, and you're right about them, and you don't apologize for being right. And I don't. He made a sound that was close to the laugh she'd heard in the barn, that brief, unwilling thing. I don't know what to do with someone who doesn't apologize for being right. Everyone else does. It's a waste of time, Claire said. I know. Yes, I know. He looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated attention she'd noticed the very first day on this very platform. I am not asking you to stay out of gratitude, he said. I want that to be clear. I know what gratitude feels like, and this is not that. What is it? She said, and her voice came out a little less steady than she'd wanted. I don't know yet, he said. I know that's not a good enough answer. I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean, Clara, and I'm not a man who says things before he's sure of them, but I also know that I watched you walk across this platform, and I could not make myself stay on that wagon, and that's... He shook his head. That's not gratitude. The train was in sight now, the engine visible down the straight line of the track, the smoke flat against the cold sky. I'm 57 years old, Clara said. I am not a new beginning. I am squarely in the middle of everything, and the middle is complicated, and it doesn't look like what people think a life should look like when they're planning one. I stopped planning mine the way I used to plan it sometime during the second bad winter, Garrett said. I just forgot to stop acting like I hadn't. She looked at him. The train was getting loud now, the platform beginning to vibrate slightly with the approach. I have $17.40, she said. That's what I came here with, and that's what I'm leaving with. Then stay, he said, and we'll figure out the rest as we get to it. That is not a plan, Claire said. No, he agreed. It's not. He looked at her steadily. But some of the best things aren't. The train came into the station with the full noise of it, the brakes, the steam, the mechanical complaint of something large coming to a stop. And Clara stood on the platform in the cold with her carpetbag in her hand and looked at Garrett Hale and did the arithmetic one more time. She had 19 days of evidence on one side. She had 57 years of knowing how things worked on the other. I'm not easy to live with, she said. I noticed, he said. I'm still here. I will tell you when you're wrong, she said. I won't apologize for it. Good, he said. I need someone who won't. I'm too old to change the parts of me that have been this way for 30 years. I'm not asking you to change anything, Garrett said. I'm asking you to stay. She stood there. The conductor appeared at the train car door and called out the departure in the mechanical, time-worn voice of someone who had called out 1,000 departures and would call out 1,000 more. Clara looked at the train, then at Garrett, then at her carpetbag. The East Pasture water access, she said. You need that surveyor's documentation filed before the 22nd. I know, Garrett said. And the farrier, before the first thaw. Clara. The north fence post, 6 of them. Danny knows which ones, but he'll need... Clara, he said. And the way he said it this time was different, quieter, more certain, the voice of a man who has found the ground under his feet and recognized it. I know. I've been paying attention. She looked at him. You have, she said. I know you have. She put her carpetbag down. Not decisively, not with any grand gesture. She just set it down on the platform boards, the way you set something down when you're not sure yet, but you're not picking it back up either, and she stood there in the cold while the conductor called out again, and 3 passengers stepped off the train and Aldous Finch pretended to check something on his clipboard. Garrett didn't move toward her. He waited, which she understood was his version of respect. You understand what you're asking, she said. It wasn't quite a question. I'm asking you to stay, he said. I know what that means. I know what it doesn't mean. I know I know there are things to figure out. I know it's not simple. He paused. I've never claimed to be simple. No, she said. You haven't. She looked at the train one more time, looked at the sky above it, that pale winter blue that went on until it became something else. Then she looked at the ranch hand who'd become something she couldn't name properly, who didn't match any list she would have written either, who watched her in the direct, uncomplicated way of someone who'd stopped performing a version of themselves and was just standing there. The train's going to leave, she said. Yes, he said. I'll need my own room, she said. For now, until we know what we're working out. Something moved across his face. Relief was in it, and something warmer. Eleanor's going to say she knew. Eleanor did know, Clara said. Yes, he said. She usually does. The train whistle sounded, the long declarative note of genuine departure, and the engine began to move, slowly at first, then less slowly, and Clara stood on the platform and watched it go and kept her hands at her sides, and the carpetbag stayed where she'd put it. When the train was out of sight, the silence it left was the most complete silence she'd experienced in weeks. Finch emerged from the station office. He looked at Clara, at the carpetbag, at Garrett, at the empty track. I'll need to update the passenger manifest, he said, in the tone of a man who is going to go home tonight and tell his wife the most interesting thing that has happened at this station in years. You do that, Aldous, Garrett said. Ruth Gallagher came out of the station building with her bag over her shoulder and looked at the empty track and then at Clara and Garrett standing on the platform, and her face did something quiet and private that she covered quickly. When's the next westbound? She asked Finch. Day after tomorrow, Finch said. 8 in the morning. I'll need lodging in town tonight and tomorrow. She looked at Clara. Is the boarding house acceptable? Mrs. Grantham is particular, Clara said, but the rooms are clean. Ruth nodded. She looked at Garrett. Mr. Hale, I hope it goes well. Thank you, Garrett said, for what you said. I said what was true, Ruth said simply. It seemed like the right thing. She walked off the platform toward the road to town, and Clara watched her go. That forward momentum, that unwilling bravery, and felt something that was mostly respect and slightly something else, something that had to do with being seen clearly by a stranger in a way that was uncomfortable and necessary. She's going to be fine, Clara said. Yes, Garrett said. She is. They stood on the empty platform for a moment, just the two of them, and the cold and the silence where a train had been. Then Garrett picked up her carpetbag. Eleanor's going to say I told you so for at least a month, he said. Longer, Clara said. Eleanor is a woman who appreciates a vindication. Are you all right with that? I've survived worse things than Eleanor being right, Clara said. So have you. He started toward the wagon. She fell into step beside him, not behind him, beside him, and the frozen ground held their weight the way ground did when it had decided to, and the road back north stretched out in front of them with all its problems intact and all its possibilities unresolved and everything still to be determined except the direction they were facing. She was not, she told herself, a woman who made sentimental decisions. She was a woman who did arithmetic. And the arithmetic, when she ran it honestly one more time on the ride back to the ranch, in the cold on the wagon seat with the pale sky overhead, kept coming out the same way it had on the platform, the same way it had every time she'd tried it over 19 days. What she was going back to was a leaking barn and a damaged fence and a land fraud scheme in progress and 7 weeks of supply calculations and a man who didn't say things he didn't mean and who went quiet when he was full of something and who had crossed a platform rather than stay on a wagon. What she was leaving behind was a train to somewhere unspecified with $17.40. The arithmetic was not complicated. She had just needed to stand on a platform long enough to let herself do it honestly. Eleanor opened the kitchen door before they'd finished tying the horse. She stood in the doorway with a coffee cup in her hand and looked at Clara and Garrett and the carpetbag and the empty wagon bed where no departed person was sitting. She said nothing. Don't, Garrett said. I haven't said anything, Eleanor said. You're saying it with your face. My face is doing nothing of the sort, Eleanor said, and stepped aside to let them in. She looked at Clara with the clear, direct eyes that never missed anything, and Clara looked back and something passed between them that didn't need words and didn't get any. Coffee, Eleanor said. Please, Clara said. She came inside and the door closed behind her, and the kitchen was warm in the way of places that have been tended carefully, and the lamp was burning on the table. And outside the prairie, winter was doing exactly what it intended to do, regardless of anyone's plans. Clara sat down at the table and wrapped her hands around the cup Eleanor put in front of her, and for the first time in 19 days, she didn't have anything to file, Anything to plan, anything to calculate. She just sat in the warmth and let it be enough for the moment, because some things couldn't be figured out in advance and had to be lived forward into, one careful day at a time, by people who had stopped pretending otherwise. The days after the station had a different quality to them. Not easier exactly, Nothing about a Dakota winter was easy, and the ranch had no interest in adjusting its demands to accommodate whatever had shifted between the two people running it. The fence still needed posts. The east pasture water access still needed defending. The horses still needed watching. But there was something in the air of the place that even Danny Polk noticed, and Danny Polk was not, by his own admission, a man who noticed atmospheres. "It's different," he said to Cal Wexler 3 days after the station, while they were working on the north fence posts Clara had identified. "The whole place is different." "Different how?" Cal said. "I don't know. Less like it's waiting for something." Cal drove a post into the frozen ground and thought about that. Ranches don't wait for things. "This one did," Danny said. "For a while." He didn't say anything else about it, and neither did Cal, and they went back to the fence, and the conversation dissolved the way conversations did in the cold, into breath and effort and the sound of work. Clara didn't feel the difference in any poetic sense. She felt it in practical terms, in the way Garrett now stopped to ask her things rather than to inform her of decisions already made, in the way Eleanor stopped watching her with that particular brand of anxious attention and replaced it with something more like ordinary company. In the way the house, which had felt like a temporary arrangement made bearable by usefulness, began to feel like a place where she had standing. Standing was not the same as belonging. She knew that. She had been careful, in her own head, not to confuse the two, but it was something. Tuko. The first real test came 6 days after the station, and it came from town rather than from the ranch itself. Martha Brennan sent word through the weekly supply delivery. Not a letter, just a message passed through the delivery boy, which was Martha's way of saying something that she didn't want on paper. The message was, "Pruitt has been talking. You should know what he's saying." Garrett read the message at the kitchen table and handed it to Clara without comment. She read it, set it down. "What has he been saying?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Garrett said, "but Martha doesn't send warnings about things that don't matter." He rode to town that afternoon. Clara stayed and managed the afternoon work, overseeing the post replacement, confirming the hay rationing schedule she'd adjusted after the storm, checking Bess and the 3 other horses she'd been monitoring for the signs she'd described to Danny. She did these things with the particular focus of someone who has learned that worry, while real, is not productive during the hours when nothing can be done about the thing you're worried about. When Garrett came back, it was nearly supper, and she could read his face from the yard. She put the potatoes on. He came in and sat at the table, and Eleanor set coffee in front of him, and nobody asked anything for the length of time it took him to decide how to say it. "Pruitt has been telling people that the Meridian offer is still on the table," he said, "and that I'm going to take it by spring." "Why would he say that?" Eleanor asked. "Because he needs me to take it," Garrett said, "or needs people to believe I will." He wrapped his hands around the coffee cup. "Martha says he's been having conversations with 2 of the other ranchers south of us, the Denton place and the Caldwell parcel. She thinks he's trying to put together a package sale, multiple properties at once, which gives Meridian enough contiguous land to make the railroad spur they want viable." Clara turned from the stove. "A railroad spur." "Through the eastern corridor," Garrett said. "If they get enough land in a line, they can negotiate a secondary rail line for freight, which makes every parcel they own worth 3 times what they paid for it." "That's why the boundary adjustment matters so much," Clara said. She came to the table and sat down. "It's not about the water access alone. If your northeast boundary shifts and they acquire that corner parcel, they have the straight line they need through the eastern corridor. You're the missing piece." "I know," Garrett said. "Does Denton know what he'd be selling into?" "I don't think so. Denton's been struggling since September. He lost a significant portion of his cattle to the early freeze." Garrett paused. "Pruitt has probably been very helpful to him this winter. Very understanding, very generous with credit or supplies or conversation." Clara recognized that pattern too. She'd seen it in Nebraska in a different form, the way certain men built obligation before they called it in. Frank Keller's situation had started the same way. Someone very helpful in the hard season who became very clear about what they expected when the season turned. What about Caldwell? She asked. Tom Caldwell is 64, and his sons are in Missouri, and he's been looking for a reason to sell for 2 years, Garrett said. For him, it probably looks like a straightforward offer. It's not a straightforward offer, Clara said. Once Meridian has those parcels, they'll lowball the remaining holdouts because the holdouts need the rail access and Meridian controls it. She looked at the table, thinking through the chain. But if you can get Denton to understand what he'd be walking into, if he decides to hold, then Meridian's line breaks and the whole corridor plan falls apart. Denton barely knows me, Garrett said. We've been neighborly, but we haven't had reason to be close. You have reason now, Clara said. He looked at her. Go see him, she said. Not about Meridian specifically, not yet. Go see him about the winter, about what he lost. Bring something useful, information about the hay rationing maybe, something practical that helps him now. Let him see you as a neighbor before you talk to him about what Pruitt's doing. That's going to take time, Garrett said. It is, Clara agreed. Less time than recovering from a bad land deal. Eleanor, who had been listening from her chair, said, Your father used to say that the most important conversations were the ones that looked like they were about something else. Garrett looked at her. He said that about horse trading. He said it about everything, Eleanor said. He was right about everything, too, which was tiresome. Something moved across Garrett's face. Not quite a smile, the echo of one. All right, he said. I'll go see Denton. Take some of the salted pork, Clara said. People think clearer when they're not hungry. She had been at the ranch for 26 days when Eleanor's hands got bad enough to matter. It hadn't come on suddenly. Clara had been watching it for days, the way she watched everything, cataloging the progression without mentioning it because Eleanor hadn't mentioned it, and it was Eleanor's body and Eleanor's business. But the morning she watched Eleanor pick up the coffee pot and put it down again without pouring, she said something. Your hands, Clara said. Eleanor looked at them. They're fine. They're not fine, Clara said. They're worse than they were a week ago. It comes and goes, Eleanor said. It's been like this for 2 years. It's nothing new. Is there a doctor in... The doctor is in Bismarck more than he's here, and what he'd tell me is the same thing he told me the last time, which is that I should rest and take willow bark tea and be patient, and I've been patient for 2 years and it's not doing anything in particular. Eleanor sat down with the specific care of someone whose joints were having opinions. It's not going to kill me. It just makes me useless. You're not useless, Clara said. Don't coddle me, Eleanor said, sharply enough that it wasn't a request. I know what I can and can't do. I've been adjusting to that list for long enough. Clara sat down across from her. What does it affect most? She asked. Eleanor looked at her, measuring the question for patronization, finding none. Fine work, she said. Anything that needs grip. Buttons are a problem. The mending I was doing when you arrived, I can't do that consistently anymore. She paused. Cooking, when it involves lifting heavy things. Garrett doesn't know how often I've been just directing the cooking rather than doing it. He probably suspects, Clara said. He's kind enough not to say so. Eleanor looked at her hands in her lap. I've been on this ranch since Garrett's father built the first structure here. 21 years. I came when my husband died and Garrett's parents needed someone. And then they died and Garrett needed someone, and now I'm the one who's... She stopped. Needing someone, Clara finished. Don't make it sound like a story, Eleanor said. It's just getting old. It's unpleasant and ordinary, and it happens to everyone who lives long enough. It does, Clara said. You're right about that. I don't want to be managed, Eleanor said. I've watched women of my age get managed by well-meaning people, and it looks like being slowly put away. I won't be put away. I know, Clara said. I'm 57. I came to this ranch because someone decided I was already on that shelf. She met Eleanor's eyes. I'm not going to do that to you. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. What are you proposing? She said, in the tone of a woman who suspects she's about to be proposed something. Nothing dramatic, Clara said. I do the heavy kitchen work. You do the things you can still do when you can do them. We don't make a production of it, and we don't announce it, and Garrett doesn't need a report. She paused. And you tell me when something's worse, and when something's better, and we adjust as we go. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "You'd better not be like this because you feel sorry for me," she said. "I'm like this because it's practical," Clara said, "and because you're better company than anyone else in this house, and I'd rather you weren't exhausted and in pain." Eleanor picked up her coffee cup with her left hand, which was the stronger one, the way she always did when she remembered to. "Fine," she said, "but I'm telling you when I disagree with how you do things." "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," Clara said. Garrett came back from the Denton place on the second visit. The first had been the introductory one, practical and brief, with the look of a man who had learned something he'd needed to know for a while. He told Clara about it in the barn, which had become the place where they had real conversations. She wasn't sure when that had started, somewhere between the lantern-lit evenings after the storm, and now, somewhere in the weeks of working alongside each other, the barn had become the place where the performances they both wore around other people could be set down for a little while. "Denton's in worse shape than I thought," Garrett said. "Not just financially. He's lonely. He's been out there alone since his wife passed 2 years ago, and his nearest neighbor was always Pruitt, and Pruitt has been very present." "Very helpful," Clara said. "Very present," Garrett repeated with the specific emphasis of someone choosing precise language. "He's been advising Denton on what to do with the property, what the best options are, what the market is like." He paused. "Denton thinks Pruitt is his advocate." "And Pruitt is Meridian's," Clara said. "Yes." Garrett leaned against Bess's stall. I couldn't come in and tell him that. He's known Pruitt for 15 years. I've been his neighbor at a distance for 6. "What did you do?" "I talked about the winter," Garrett said. "I talked about what the storm cost. I told him about the boundary letter from the land office, not all of it, just that I'd had a surveyor out and there were some things worth being careful about if he'd received any similar correspondence." He paused. He had. Clara looked up from the horse's leg she'd been checking. "The same pattern," she said. "Different property, same structure, a survey, update from August, a note about boundary markers, an easement documentation request." He met her eyes. He hadn't thought anything of it. "Did you tell him what it meant?" "I told him what Art Sweeney told me. What you told me first." He paused. He got quiet for a long time. Then he said he wanted to see the letters together, his and mine, and think about it. "That's good," Claire said. "That's the right response." "I gave him Martha Brennan's name," Garrett said. "Said she was a reliable person to talk to in town who would hold information carefully." He looked at her. "You suggested her." "She's the right person," Claire said. "She has no stake in the land situation, and she's been watching Pruitt for longer than anyone, I think." "Why does Martha watch Pruitt?" "Because she's a woman running a business in a town where certain men think certain things are allowed, and she's learned that watching those men is useful." Clara straightened up. "She doesn't like him. She hasn't for years. She'd like very much to have a reason to say so publicly that isn't just personal." Garrett was quiet, processing. "Caldwell," he said. "Tom Caldwell. He's the harder one." "Because he wants to sell," Clara said. "He's 64 and tired, and his sons aren't coming back. The ranch is a burden to him at this point, not a legacy." Garrett's voice held no judgment, just the plainness of a man stating something true. "I understand that." "You can't stop him from selling," Clara said. "And you shouldn't try." Garrett looked at her. "What you can do," Clara said, "is make sure he sells to the right buyer at the right price." She folded her arms against the cold of the barn. "If Caldwell sells to a private buyer before Meridian can acquire the parcel, the corridor breaks the same way it does if Denton holds. Does anyone in town want agricultural land?" Garrett thought about it. "The Hendersons have a son who's been looking to start his own operation. He's 28, he knows the land, he's got some money set aside." "Would Tom Caldwell sell to the Henderson boy at a fair price?" "Probably. He likes the family. He'd probably—" Garrett stopped. "He'd probably feel better about it than selling to a company he's never met." "Then someone needs to have that conversation with Tom Caldwell before Meridian makes their formal offer," Clara said. "And it shouldn't be you, because it can't look like you're trying to control what he does with his property." "Who then?" Martha Brennan, Clara said. Again. Garrett looked at her with that expression she'd stopped trying to catalog, the expression that appeared when she said something he'd been about to think of and hadn't gotten there yet. "You've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "I've been thinking about it since Pruitt came to the yard," Clara said. "That was 2 weeks ago." "I know," she said. "I didn't want to say anything until I'd thought through enough of it to be useful." He pushed off from Bess's stall and came to stand beside her, not crowding her, just near. "What else?" he said. "What else have you been thinking through?" She told him. She laid out the whole of it, the sequence, the timing, who needed to talk to whom, in what order, the land office challenge timeline, and what would happen if it was contested, and what the counter-documentation should look like. She told him about the pattern she'd seen in Frank Heller's situation, and how it had ended, and what the pivot point had been where something could have been done and wasn't. He listened the way he always listened, completely, without interrupting, with the full weight of his attention. And when she was finished, he was quiet for a moment in the specific way that meant he was running through it himself, checking it against what he knew. "There's one thing you're missing," he said. She looked at him. "What?" "Edmund Harlow," he said, "the man who came with Pruitt. He's not just Meridian's representative, he's a partner in the company. If we can document Meridian's pattern, the survey manipulation, the easement request, the boundary adjustment scheme, across multiple properties and file it with the territorial government, it's not a local land dispute. It becomes a fraud investigation." He paused, "which is a very different kind of problem for them." Clara looked at him. "You've been thinking about this too," she said. "I've been thinking about it since you showed me those 4 letters on the desk," he said. "I just didn't have the full shape until you gave me the corridor piece." They looked at each other in the barn with the horses breathing around them and the cold pressing against the walls, and the particular quality of a shared understanding settling between 2 people who had each been working at a problem from different angles and had just found the place where the work connected. "You need a lawyer," Clara said, "not just for the land office challenge, for the fraud documentation." "I know," Garrett said. "I'm going to Bismarck next week." "Take all the correspondence," Clara said, "everything from the land office for the past year, and write down everything Pruitt said when he came to the yard. The exact words you remember, in sequence. Details matter in legal documentation." "I know," he said. "You know who taught me that?" She didn't answer that, but she didn't look away either. The weeks that followed moved in the way of winter weeks on the frontier, slowly in the living, quickly in the looking back. The cold deepened. The work continued. The ranch settled into the rhythm that Claire had been quietly helping establish since her first day there. The feed schedule, the rotation plan, the monitoring system for the horses that Danny Polk had taken on as his own project with a seriousness that had transformed him in ways she suspected he wasn't fully aware of yet. She and Garrett did not talk about what had been said at the station, and they didn't need to. What existed between them existed in the daily business of it, in the conversations over the ledger in the evenings, in the way he deferred to her reading of the cattle's condition without ceremony, in the way she deferred to his knowledge of the land geography without ceremony, in the way they had stopped performing their respective competencies for each other and were just using them. Eleanor watched all of this with the satisfied attention of a woman who has been right about something important and is choosing, mostly, to resist saying so. Mostly. "He's sleeping better," she told Clara one morning, while Clara was baking and Eleanor was doing the mending she could still manage with her left hand. "He hasn't slept properly in 2 years. He goes to bed at a reasonable hour now." "People sleep better when the problems they've been carrying alone get shared," Clara said. "Is that what you call it?" Eleanor said. "Sharing problems?" "That's what it is," Clara said. "For now." Eleanor made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite disagreement. "He's going to ask you eventually," she said. Clara kept her hands in the dough. "I know," she said. "What are you going to say?" "I don't know yet," Clara said. "I'll say what's true when the time comes." "You always do," Eleanor said, in a tone that was entirely a compliment. Chant. The Bismarck lawyer's name was Harold Oates, and he was the kind of man who didn't say much in the first meeting because he was running the calculation of whether you were worth his time, and then said a great deal in the second because he decided you were. Garrett came back from the first trip with a list of documents Oates needed and a look on his face that was cautiously something. He thinks we have something, Garrett said. What kind of something? Clara asked. He's seen the Meridian name before. Not in the territory, it's further east in Minnesota. A similar pattern, he said. Survey manipulation, boundary adjustment, easement documents used to create access dependencies. He sat at the table. He wants all of it. Every letter, the preliminary survey from Sweeney, the deed with the benchmark discrepancy. He wants anything I have on the dates and the sequence. I can help you organize it, Clara said. The sequence matters more than the individual documents. The pattern is in the sequence. That's what he said, Garrett said. He looked at her. Almost exactly what he said. She organized it that evening at the kitchen table, while Garrett sat across from her and filled in the dates she didn't know from his own memory of when letters had arrived and what had followed. Eleanor went to bed early, which was her version of giving them room without making a speech about it. They worked for 3 hours, and at the end of it, there was a documented sequence of 8 communications across 6 months that told a story any reasonable person could follow. The incremental steps, the bureaucratic language that looked routine until you read it as part of a progression, the careful paper trail of a company that had done this before and knew how to make fraud look like administration. This is good, Garrett said. It's enough to start with, Clara said. Oates will tell you if it's enough to finish with. Garrett looked at the papers spread between them. He didn't say anything for a moment. Clara, he said. She looked up. I want to talk about something that isn't the land situation, he said. She set down her pen. All right, she said. He looked at the table for a moment, not avoiding her eyes, just finding his way into what he wanted to say, which she recognized as how he was with anything that mattered. I know what I said at the station was... He stopped. I know I didn't say it the way it probably should have been said. I said I didn't know what it was yet, and I asked you to stay, and that was honest, but it was also... He stopped again. Incomplete, she offered, the way she had on the first day. Yes, he said. Incomplete. He met her eyes. I know what it is now. The lamp between them burned steadily. Outside, the wind moved across the plain the way it always did, with no particular agenda. I'm 57, she said. I know, he said. I was there when you told me. I'm not going to suddenly be something I'm not, she said. I'm going to get older. I'm not the beginning of anything. Neither am I, Garrett said. I'm 42 and I've made 10 years of careful, practical decisions and called it building a life. And I built a decent ranch and a very quiet house. He paused. I'm not looking for a beginning. I'm looking for... He thought about it, and she could see him finding the honest words rather than the available ones. Someone to be in the middle of things with. Someone who's been places and knows what things cost and doesn't need me to explain why the hard seasons are hard. I don't need you to explain that, she said. No, he said. You don't. He held her gaze. I know this is not a simple thing to say yes to. I know I'm not a simple man and this isn't a simple situation, and I'm asking something that... Garrett, she said. He stopped. I know what you're asking, she said. I've known for a while. I've been thinking about it. What have you been thinking? He asked. She looked at the papers between them, the documented fraud, the careful sequence of a scheme that had tried to quietly dismantle something people had built through years of hard work. She looked at the lamp. She looked at her hands, which were not young hands, which had worked too hard for too long to be anything other than what they were. I've been thinking, she said slowly, that I spent 22 years in a marriage that was decent and workable and not unkind, and I was grateful for it, and when it ended I thought I'd had what there was to have. She paused. And then I came to a train platform in Dakota Territory by accident, and a man on a horse looked at me like I was worth looking at, and I thought I had maybe been wrong about what there was left. Garrett didn't move. I'm not easy, she said. You've said that. I'm saying it again because it's true, and you should be clear. I'm clear, he said. Clara, I'm very clear. She looked at him across the lamp and the papers, and the distance between them that was not as much distance as it had been 36 days ago on a different platform. Yes, she said. He was still for a moment. Yes, she said again. Is that clear enough? Something moved across his face. the full version of the expression she'd only ever seen in pieces before. It wasn't the polished warmth of a man who was practiced at this. It was something rawer and realer, the expression of a man who had stopped expecting the thing that was happening and was still catching up to the fact of it. "Yes," he said. "That's clear." They sat at the table with the papers between them for another moment, and then Clara picked up her pen and went back to the documentation sequence because the lawyer still needed it organized, and the feeling in the room could coexist with the work. And she had always found that the things that mattered could do that, could live alongside the ordinary business of life without requiring it to stop. Garrett watched her for a second. Then he picked up his notes and went back to the dates. They worked for another hour, and the lamp burned between them, and Eleanor, who was absolutely not asleep in her room down the hall, smiled at nothing in particular in the dark. It was Danny Polk who noticed the clock first, not the significance of it, just the fact of it. He came in from the morning chores 3 days later and stopped in the kitchen doorway and looked at the wall above the stove. "Is that clock new?" he said. Eleanor looked up from her tea. "No. It's working," Danny said. "Clocks generally work," Eleanor said. "That one hasn't worked since I've been here," Danny said. 2 years. It's always said 3:10. He looked at the clock, then at Clara, who was at the stove. "You fix it?" "Last night," Clara said. "The spring mechanism was seized. It needed cleaning and resetting. It wasn't complicated." Danny looked at the clock for another moment. "Huh," he said. He poured his coffee and went back outside, and the clock ticked steadily on the wall, measuring out the morning in the ordinary way of things restored to their proper function. And Clara turned back to the stove, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the winter was still doing what it did, and the ranch was still standing, and some things were different than they had been 36 days ago, and some things were exactly the same, and the combination of the two was something she was still learning to hold without categorizing. The clock ticked. She let it. Harold Oates came to Red Hollow in the second week of January. He didn't announce himself in advance, which Clara had come to understand was his method. He moved when he was ready and expected the people he was moving toward to be ready also, which was either arrogance or efficiency, depending on how you looked at it. He arrived on the morning train with a leather satchel that looked like it had been to more territorial disputes than most lawyers saw in a career. And he walked from the station to Martha Brennan's store because he'd apparently corresponded with Martha directly at some point in the week since Garrett's visit to Bismarck, which was the kind of development Clara found entirely unsurprising. Martha sent her delivery boy out to the ranch with a note that said simply, "He's here. Bring everything." Garrett and Clara rode to town together. She carried the documentation sequence she'd organized, the 8 communication chain, the survey discrepancy, the deed benchmark comparison, the preliminary assessment from Art Sweeney, in a folder she'd made from brown paper and twine because there hadn't been a proper file folder in the ranch house, and she'd made do, the way she made do with everything. Oates was in Martha's back room when they arrived, sitting at the work table that Martha used for accounts, with his satchel open and papers already spread around him. He was a compact man in his 50s, with the look of someone who had spent decades being underestimated in rooms and had found it useful. He looked at Garrett, then at Clara, then at the brown paper folder she was carrying. "Is that the sequence documentation?" he said. "Yes," Clara said. "You organized it?" "Yes." He held out his hand. She gave him the folder. He opened it and read for 4 minutes without saying anything, turning pages with the focused attention of a man who read for information rather than performance. "All right," he said when he'd finished. "This is better than most of what lawyers put together themselves." He looked at Clara. "You've done this before?" "No," she said. "I watched someone fail to do it and learned from that." Oates looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, then turned to Garrett. "The pattern here is consistent with what I saw in the Minnesota cases. Survey benchmark substitution, sequential easement requests designed to create paper trail dependencies, boundary adjustments that individually look like clerical corrections, but cumulatively shift property lines in a specific direction." He tapped the folder. "The corridor logic, using multiple parcels to create a freight rail spur, I hadn't connected that element. That changes the scale of the claim." "It changes it how?" Garrett asked. From a property dispute to a scheme affecting multiple landowners across a defined geographic area, Oates said. Which means the remedy isn't just protecting your individual boundary. The remedy is dismantling the mechanism. He paused. That's a bigger case. It requires more documentation, specifically evidence that other properties in the corridor have received the same pattern of correspondence. Denton has, Garrett said. He confirmed it. I need to see his letters. He'll show you, Garrett said. I can take you out there this afternoon. Oates nodded. He looked at Martha, who had been standing in the doorway of the back room with the specific quality of someone who is listening with their whole body while appearing to do something else entirely. Mrs. Brennan, he said, you mentioned in your letter that you've observed a pattern in Pruitt's business relationships in this town over the past 3 years. I have, Martha said. I'll need that in writing, dated, specific, no editorializing, just what you observed and when. I can do that, Martha said. Today, Oates said. Martha looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been given instructions by men her whole life and has developed a fine internal calibration for distinguishing between the ones worth following and the ones worth ignoring. I was going to say today, she said. Numbed. The visit to Denton's place took the better part of the afternoon. Robert Denton was a man in his mid-50s who had the look of someone who had been weathered by honest work rather than hard luck, which was a distinction Clara had learned to make early. He met them in the yard with the wariness of a man who had recently had his trust in his own judgment shaken and hadn't finished deciding what to do about that. He looked at Garrett. He looked at Clara. He looked at Oates. I got your note, he said to Garrett. I know, Garrett said. This is Harold Oates. He's a lawyer out of Bismarck. He's looking at the land office situation. My situation, Denton said. Or yours. Both, Oates said. Potentially several others. May I see the correspondence you received? Denton looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara, which surprised her. She hadn't expected to be the one he sought in that moment. Garrett vouches for him? He said, to her, rather than to Garrett. Garrett vouches for him, she said. And the documentation he reviewed this morning holds up. He knows what he's looking at. Denton chewed on that for a second. Then he nodded and went inside, and they followed, and he laid out his land office letters on the kitchen table, 5 of them, spanning from July to November. And Oates read them with the same focused silence he'd brought to everything, and when he finished, he set them down and said, Same mechanism, different property, identical structure. So Pruitt's been working both of us, Denton said. He said it flatly, without heat, the way people stated things that had moved past the stage of being surprising into the stage of just being true. Pruitt is likely Meridian's local facilitator, Oates said. He identifies properties, establishes relationships, and creates the conditions that make the survey manipulation look unrelated to his involvement. He paused. Which is why, Mr. Denton, I want to be direct with you. If you want to sell your property, if that is genuinely what you want for your own reasons, that is entirely your right. What I'm trying to prevent is you selling it under false conditions, at a price determined by artificial pressure, to a buyer whose interest in your land is part of a scheme that harms your neighbors. Denton was quiet for a moment. Pruitt told me the market was soft, he said, that I should take what was offered before it got worse. The market isn't soft, Oates said. The market in this corridor is about to become significantly more valuable if a freight rail spur is established. Meridian knows that. They're acquiring land at depressed prices before the value is publicly understood. Denton looked at the letters on his table. He came to me in October, he said, after the early freeze. Brought supplies I hadn't asked for. Said he was just being a neighbor. He stopped. I felt grateful. I know, Garrett said. That's the worst part of it, Denton said. Not that he lied, that he made me feel... He stopped again. Obligated, Clara said. Denton looked at her. Yes. That's the method, she said. It's not about tricking people. It's about making them feel like the arrangement was their idea because they already owe something. It's harder to fight than outright dishonesty. She paused. A man who lies to you, you can just not believe. A man who helped you in November is harder to say no to in January. Denton looked at the letters for a long moment. What do I do? He asked. Right now, Oates said, nothing. You don't respond to any further correspondence from the land office or from Meridian until you've heard from me. You don't have any further conversations with Pruitt about the property. And you write down every interaction you've had with him this fall. Dates, what was said, what he brought, everything you remember. Like she did, Denton said, nodding toward Clara's folder. Exactly like that, Oates said. Some dead. Tom Caldwell had already talked to the Henderson boy by the time Oates left Red Hollow, which was Martha Brennan's doing and had happened with the quiet efficiency of someone who understood that the right conversation at the right moment was worth 3 months of legal maneuvering. Martha told Clara about it 2 days after Oates's visit, when Clara came to town for supplies. I had Tom in here last week, Martha said, ostensibly about his winter stores. We talked about other things. She was sorting bolts of fabric as she talked, the way she was always doing something with her hands. I mentioned that young Henderson had been asking about land in the area. I mentioned that Tom's parcel was exactly the kind of place a young man starting out would want. Established water access, good fencing, the infrastructure already done. I said it purely as an observation. Of course, Clara said. Tom went to see Henderson the next day, Martha said. They had a conversation. Henderson's going to make an offer. A fair one? A fair one, Martha confirmed. Henderson's people are honest. Tom knows that. She set down the fabric. He'll sell and he'll feel good about it, which is all anyone can ask for. Clara looked at her. You're very good at this, Clara said. Martha looked slightly startled, as if the direct compliment had come from an unexpected angle. I've been running a business in this town for 14 years, she said. You learn to see what's moving under the surface. You see more than that, Clara said. You see what people need before they know they need it, and you find a way to give it to them that preserves their sense of having decided for themselves. Martha was quiet for a moment. My husband used to say I should have been a politician, she said. Politicians do it for power, Clara said. You do it because it's right. That's different. Martha picked up the fabric again. Her expression was the most unguarded Clara had seen it. You're not what I expected either, Martha said, when I first saw you come off that train. So I've been told, Clara said. I mean it as the highest compliment I know how to give. I know, Clara said. Thank you. Oates filed the formal land fraud complaint with the territorial government in the 3rd week of January. It named the Meridian Land Company specifically, documented the survey benchmark manipulation across 3 properties, identified the corridor scheme and its relationship to the proposed freight rail spur, and included Martha Brennan's written account of Pruitt's business pattern in Red Hollow, spanning 3 years. It was 41 pages, and it was, by Oates's own assessment, delivered to Garrett in a letter that arrived the same day as the filing confirmation. The most complete documentation of a territorial land fraud scheme he had assembled in 20 years of practice. The territorial government's response came within 2 weeks, which Oates said was unusually fast and indicated that Meridian had been on someone's attention before this. They suspended the August survey's incorporation into the official land record pending investigation. They opened a formal inquiry into the easement documentation process across all 3 affected properties. And they sent a notice to Edmund Harlow at the Chicago address listed for the Meridian Land Company, informing him that all acquisition activities in the Eastern Dakota Territory corridor were suspended pending the outcome of the inquiry. Garrett read the response letter at the kitchen table while Clara was making supper, and Eleanor was in her chair with her mending, and Danny Polk was sitting on the back step waiting for the biscuits she'd promised, which was something that had happened with increasing regularity over the past weeks. Danny finding reasons to be in the vicinity of the kitchen at mealtimes, which nobody mentioned and everyone accommodated. It's done, Garrett said. He said it like a man who had been holding something heavy for a long time and was checking whether he was actually allowed to put it down. The investigation is open, Clara said. That's not the same as done. It'll take months, probably. But the survey is suspended, which means the boundary can't shift while the inquiry is active, and Meridian can't acquire in the corridor, which breaks their timeline. And their timeline was everything, Garrett said. Their timeline was everything, Clara agreed. A freight spur only gets built when the land acquisition is complete and the financing is arranged and the survey is clean. They needed all three simultaneously. They don't have any of them now. Garrett put the letter down. Denton called it a relief, he said. I talked to him yesterday. He said it felt like something that had been pressing on him for months just lifted. It probably did, Clara said. He'd been carrying it without knowing what it was, which is worse than carrying something you can name. Tom Caldwell's deal with Henderson went through, Garrett said. Martha sent word this morning. I know, Clara said. She told me. He looked at her. When did you talk to Martha? Tuesday. I went to town. You didn't tell me. You were at the north fence with Danny, and I needed salt, and I handled two things at once, Clara said. I'm telling you now. There was a moment where she expected something, not quite argument, the shape of it, and it didn't come. Garrett looked at her with the expression she had stopped trying to catalog months ago, the one that lived somewhere between exasperation and something much warmer than that. All right, he said. All right, she agreed. Danny Polk, from the back step, said, Are those biscuits close? 5 minutes, Clara said. You said that 10 minutes ago. Then they're very close, she said. Pruitt came to the ranch one more time. He came alone, which was different from before, and he came in the middle of the afternoon, which was the time of day that most clearly said he'd thought about it and decided rather than acted on impulse. Garrett was in the equipment shed. Clara saw him from the kitchen window and went to the door. He stopped his horse at the yard edge and looked at her. Mrs. Ashcroft, he said. Mr. Pruitt, she said. He didn't dismount, which told her something about the nature of the visit. I wanted to talk to Garrett, he said. He's in the shed, Clara said. She didn't move from the doorway. Pruitt looked at her for a moment. He had the expression of a man who was in the process of recalculating something significant and hadn't finished. The territorial inquiry, he said. Yes, she said. I had no... He stopped. My involvement with Meridian was as a local land broker. I connected buyers and sellers. I wasn't aware of the specific mechanisms they used. Clara looked at him steadily. Mr. Pruitt, she said, I'm going to say something directly, and I'd appreciate if you'd hear it in the spirit it's offered. He waited. I don't know exactly what you knew and what you didn't, she said. That's for the inquiry to determine, and if your involvement was genuinely limited to brokering, then the inquiry will reflect that. She paused. What I do know is that you came to this property twice with the intent to pressure Garrett into a decision that would have benefited Meridian at the expense of everything he's built. And I know what you said on this platform the day I arrived. She held his gaze. I'm not saying this out of anger. I'm saying it because I think you're a man who tells himself a story about his own motivations that is more comfortable than the true one, and that story is going to keep costing you. Pruitt was very still on his horse. The men you were steering toward Meridian, Clara said. Denton, Caldwell, they're your neighbors. They've been your neighbors for years. Whatever Meridian offered you, it was paid for with their loss. She paused. That's the part you're going to have to live with, regardless of what the inquiry finds. He looked at her for a long moment. His face was complicated in ways she didn't try to read. I'll talk to Garrett another time, he said. All right, she said. He turned his horse and rode back toward the road. She stood in the doorway until he was out of sight, and then she went back inside and put the kettle on, because there was nothing else to do about Wallace Pruitt, and she'd said what was true, and the rest was his to carry. Garrett came in from the shed 20 minutes later and found her at the table. Was that Pruitt? He said. Yes, she said. What did he want? To talk to you, she said. He changed his mind. Garrett looked at her. What did you say to him? He said. What was true, she said. He looked at her for another moment, then went to wash his hands at the basin, and when he came back he sat across from her and she poured tea, and they didn't discuss it further, which was one of the things she had come to value most about the way they lived in the same space, the ability to let things be finished when they were finished. February arrived the way February did on the northern plains, without apology and without any pretense of improvement over January. The cold deepened. The days grew slightly longer in a way that you could measure but not feel. The ranch continued. And the ranch, Clara thought sometimes, in the early mornings before anyone else was up, was genuinely better than it had been. Not perfect. The east fence was a problem that would take the spring to fully address, and the barn's structural issues were going to need professional attention before next winter, and the supply arrangement with Mercer had been renegotiated, but not to her satisfaction yet, and there were 17 other things on the list she kept in her head, updated daily, sorted by urgency and season. But the hay rationing had held. The cattle had come through the worst of winter in better condition than the previous year, which Danny told her with the specific pride of someone who had been part of the reason. The drainage reroute had functioned through every freeze since November, and Garrett was already planning the proper installation for spring with the right materials and grade. The north fence posts were in the ground solidly, all 6 of the original rotted ones replaced, and Danny had shown Cal the correct method, and Cal had shown Pete Wexler, and the knowledge had moved the way useful knowledge moved between people who respected each other. Bess was sound. All 4 horses were sound. The land office challenge was active, and the boundary was protected. These were not small things. Clara had lived long enough to know that the difference between a ranch that survived and one that didn't was almost never one dramatic event. It was the accumulation of small things caught early, small problems addressed before they became large ones, small knowledge applied at the right moment. That was what she had brought, not heroics. Attention. She thought about Frank Heller sometimes, not with guilt. She hadn't been in a position to give him what she knew then because she hadn't known it yet herself. But she thought about him as the person who had taught her, inadvertently, what not waiting looked like, what it cost to let the pattern get established before you named it. She hoped he'd found his footing elsewhere. She thought he probably had. Frank was stubborn in the productive way. She thought about Ruth Gallagher, too, occasionally. That straight spine and those clear eyes and the decision she'd made on a cold platform, with a composure that had surprised everyone, including, Clara suspected, Ruth herself. She hoped she'd found a good placement. She thought she would. A woman with that quality of honest self-assessment generally found her way. And she thought sometimes about the train she hadn't boarded. Not with regret. With something more like wonder at the specific randomness of it. The agency's clerical error, the mixed files, the wrong name on the papers, and all of it cascading forward into this kitchen and this ranch, and this man who went quiet when he was full of something and who had crossed a platform rather than stay on a wagon. She had not believed in the kind of luck that felt like design. She still didn't, quite. But she believed in paying attention, and she believed in being honest about what you saw when you paid attention, and she believed that both of those things together created conditions where something that could have been missed got caught instead. That was enough of an explanation. It had to be. Garrett asked her to marry him on a Thursday. Not because Thursday was significant. It was simply the day it happened, the way things happened on their own timing regardless of whether the calendar agreed. He asked her in the barn, which she supposed was inevitable, and he asked her without preamble, which was entirely him. She had been checking the crack in Bess's left front hoof. The farrier had been out in January and addressed it, but she monitored it still, the way she monitored everything. And Garrett had come in from checking the water levels in the rerouted drainage channel, which he did every morning now, without being reminded. And he'd stood at Bess's stall door for a moment and then said, "I'd like to marry you." Clara kept her hands on the hoof for a moment. Then she set it down carefully and straightened up. "You'd like to," she said. "I want to," he said. "I'd like to is what came out." "There's a difference," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to, Clara. I want to marry you." She looked at him across Bess's back. He had mud on his coat from the drainage channel, and his hat was slightly wrong from the wind, and he looked exactly like what he was. A man in the middle of his life, in the middle of a hard season, in the middle of everything that was still unresolved and still being worked on, asking a question he had clearly been thinking about for longer than this morning. "You understand what you're asking," she said. It was the same thing she'd said at the station, and she said it again deliberately. "Better than I did at the station," he said. "A lot better." She thought about what Eleanor had said months ago. That truth changed, that what was true on Tuesday was sometimes different by Saturday. She had thought at the time that it was the kind of thing people said when they wanted to give hope a more respectable name. She had come to think it was something more specific than that, not that truth changed, but that people changed in their capacity to receive it. that you could have a true thing in front of you for weeks before you were honest enough with yourself to look at it directly. She had been looking at this directly for a while. The east fence, she said. Spring project, he said. Danny's got the sequence. The barn structure. I've got a man coming from Bismarck in April. The Mercer supply arrangement. I'm going to tell him Tuesday that the rate adjusts or the contract doesn't renew, Garrett said. I know, Clara, I've been paying attention. She looked at him. You have, she said. Yes, he said. I have. She was quiet for a moment, with Bess warm and patient beside her, and the cold of the barn around them and the sound of the ranch going about its business outside. Danny's voice from the direction of the north pasture, the particular clank of the equipment shed door, the ordinary, unglamorous sound of a working place. Yes, she said. Garrett let out a breath that was not quite steady. Yes, she said again. Stop looking at me like that. Like what? Like you thought I was going to say something else. I thought you might want to negotiate, he said. I'm done negotiating, she said. I've been done for a while. I was just waiting for you to ask properly. That was proper, he said. It was adequate, she said. It was you. He came around Bess's stall door and stood in front of her, close, and she looked up at him. She had to look up, which she didn't do often with people. And his face had that expression that she'd stopped trying to catalog and had just started accepting as his, the one that lived in the difficult territory between what he felt and what he knew how to say. He took her hand, her worn, worked 57-year-old hand, and he held it the way you hold something you intend to keep. All right, he said. All right, she agreed. Eleanor cried, which she denied. I have dry eyes in winter, she said, at the kitchen table with a handkerchief that she was definitely not using for dry eyes. Of course, Clara said. It's the cold air. It comes right through the walls, Clara agreed. Don't be smug, Eleanor said. It's unbecoming. I'm not being smug, Clara said. I'm being agreeable. You're never just agreeable, Eleanor said. You're always agreeable about something specific, which is different. But she was smiling, the full version, the one she didn't bother controlling. Danny Polk, when told, said, finally, with the exhausted relief of someone who had been waiting for a thing to happen for 2 months and had lost patience with the pace of it. Cal Wexler shook Garrett's hand without comment and then found something to do in the equipment shed. Pete Wexler said congratulations to Clara 3 times in one conversation, which she suspected was nerves, and she thanked him 3 times with equal sincerity. Martha Brennan, when Clara told her on the next supply day, looked at her for a long moment and then said, Good, with a firmness that contained about 3 paragraphs of things she had apparently decided didn't need saying. Good, Clara agreed. The town's going to have opinions, Martha said. The town has always had opinions, Clara said. I stopped being managed by opinions about 20 years ago. I know, Martha said. That's why I said good instead of congratulations. They married in March, when the first real thaw came and the ground had the beginning of give to it, and the ceremony was in Martha Brennan's back room because the wind made the outdoors impractical, and Eleanor's hands weren't equal to a long, cold ride to anywhere else. It was small. Martha and her husband, Denton, who had driven over because Garrett had asked him and he had come without hesitation, Danny and the Wexler brothers in their cleaned-up versions. Art Sweeney, the surveyor who had happened to be in town on unrelated business and was invited because Clara liked him and because he had been part of what had held the ranch together. Eleanor sat in the chair they'd brought from the ranch and held her left hand steady with her right and looked at both of them with the clear, direct eyes that missed nothing and were bright in a way that had nothing to do with dry winter air. Clara wore her second-best dress, which was better than her best one, which she'd always thought was a mistake in construction, and Garrett wore his good coat and his good hat and had clearly asked Danny to tell him if anything was wrong with either because she saw Danny give him a brief nod when he walked in, which she found entirely endearing in both of them. It was not a long ceremony. Neither of them had wanted long. They had both done things before in their lives that were longer and more elaborate and had led to good places and places that simply were, and they were past the age of confusing ceremony with substance. When it was done, and the small room was holding the particular warmth of people crowded together for something that mattered. Denton shook Garrett's hand and held it for a moment and said, "Your father would have liked her." Garrett looked at him. "You knew my father," he said. "Not well," Denton said. "Well enough. He was a plain-speaking man." He looked at Clara. He liked plain-speaking people. "I can be diplomatic when it's necessary," Clara said. "She can," Danny confirmed from behind her, in the tone of someone who had evidence on both sides. The spring came the way springs came on the northern plains. Tentatively at first, the warmth arriving in hours rather than days, and then retreating, testing, returning. The cattle went to the south pasture in the sequence Clara had laid out in November, and the north pasture rested, and the east fence got its full repair in April, with Danny overseeing and Cal doing the heavy work, and Pete Wexler handling the wire runs with a competence he hadn't had in November. The barn man from Bismarck came and did what he came to do, and the barn was sounder than it had been in 3 years, and the cost of it was less than the cost of losing one more animal to inadequate shelter, which was the arithmetic Clara had done in January when she'd put the barn on the list. The Meridian inquiry concluded in April. The findings held: survey manipulation, fraudulent benchmark substitution, systematic easement misrepresentation across multiple properties. Edmund Harlow's formal acquisition activities in the territory were suspended indefinitely. The Meridian Land Company filed no criminal defense and made no public statement, which Oates said in his letter was the response of a company calculating that silence was cheaper than admission. Pruitt's role was formally described in the findings as that of a facilitating agent who had provided local knowledge and relationship access in exchange for commission arrangements. It was careful language that said more than it appeared to. He received a formal censure from the Territorial Land Office and a prohibition on engaging in brokerage activities involving Land Office correspondence for 3 years. Garrett showed Clara the letter. She read it and set it down. "Not enough," he said. "No," she agreed. "But the pattern is documented now. It exists in the official record. The next time he tries something similar, there's a prior finding." She paused. "That's not justice, exactly. It's the thing you build toward justice with." "That's a patient way to look at it," he said. "I'm a patient person," she said, "when the situation requires it." He gave her a look. "When the situation requires it," she repeated steadily. He shook his head in the way that had become its own kind of language between them, and she went back to what she'd been doing, and the letter went into the file where she kept the documentation sequence, and life continued. Robert Denton came to dinner in May, his first time at the ranch, and he came with a bottle of something decent and the look of a man who had been carrying less than he'd been carrying in January and was still getting used to the difference in weight. He and Garrett talked about the spring work while Clara and Eleanor listened and occasionally corrected, and Danny Polk ate 3 helpings of everything and said almost nothing, which had become his mode in social situations: present, attentive, quiet, absorbing. After dinner, when Garrett and Denton had gone out to look at the drainage reroute, because Denton was thinking about a similar system on his east side, Eleanor and Clara sat at the table with coffee and the comfortable silence of women who had been in each other's company long enough to not need to fill every moment. "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked. Clara considered the question seriously, the way Eleanor had always deserved to have her questions considered. "I'm not sure happy is the right word," she said. "I'm settled. I'm in the right place doing the right work with the right person, and I know it." She paused. "There's something that's better than happy in that. Happy comes and goes. What I mean is something more like certain about where I am." Eleanor looked at her. "That's a better thing than happy," Eleanor said. "Most people don't find it. Most people stop looking too early," Clara said. "Or they find something that looks like it and stop checking whether it still is. Or they decide they've missed their chance," Eleanor said. "That too," Clara said. She had thought about that often, about the specific cruelty of the idea that life had chapters, and certain things belonged in certain chapters, and when the chapter was done, you were done with those things too. She had been told, not in words, but in every social arrangement she'd encountered for the past decade, that what she was looking for at 57 was not what 57 was for. That 57 was for managing what remained, not for beginning what was new. She had nearly believed it. She had done the arithmetic at the station with $17.40 in her purse and nearly let that arithmetic be the whole of it. What she had learned in the months since was that the arithmetic was never the whole of it. You could run the numbers 100 times and they would tell you what was probable and they would not tell you what was possible. And confusing those two things was the most expensive mistake a person could make. She had paid attention and she had stayed and she had done the work and she had said what was true. And what came from that was not a story about love finding a way or life rewarding the deserving. Life did not work that way, and she had never believed it did. What came from it was simpler and harder and more real than that. She had been in the right place at the right moment, and she had been honest enough with herself to recognize it. And recognition was a choice, not a gift. You had to be paying attention in order to receive it, and most people were looking at what they expected to see rather than what was actually there. She had been lucky in the specific sense of having been present enough to recognize her luck. That was all. That was enough. Garrett and Denton came back in from outside with mud on their boots, and the particular energy of men who have looked at a practical problem and seen a solution, and Eleanor put the coffee on again, and Danny Polk appeared from the direction of the barn because he had apparently been waiting for the kettle noise, and the kitchen filled up with ordinary evening noise. Boots and chairs, and the particular argument Danny and Garrett were having about the grade on Denton's east side. And Clara sat in the middle of it and let it be what it was. 57 years old and settled. Certain, in the right place. The clock ticked on the wall above the stove, steady, repaired, keeping time the way it was supposed to. Red Hollow Station was 7 miles south at the end of a road she knew well now, and the trains came through it twice a week, and none of them were for her.